Our story began on a dark, snowy night. Towering castle walls loomed in the background. Outside the walls, a pile of dumpsters lay buried under thick snow. Suddenly, a hand rose from the heap. A young blonde boy emerged. His breath was visible in the freezing air. His blue eyes stood out in the darkness. Our MC knelt on one knee, one hand on the ground for support, and the other gripping the sword. His clenched teeth and intense stare showed his determination. He was a star trying to shine through sheer will. Just a few days ago, he stood at the entrance of an old swordsmith's house, staring at something. He was silently admiring a sword, thinking about how it always looked cool no matter how often he saw it. Then someone nearby spoke, catching his attention. This person knew he'd be there. Our MC turned and saw a girl named Zemina. She called him Vlad and mentioned he seemed distracted lately. Vlad looked annoyed and told her not to bother him, saying he was using one of the few breaks he got. Zemina replied with a teasing comment, suggesting that people were spreading rumors about him. Our MC asked about the rumors, but Zemina hesitated to say anything. She then leaned in closer and asked if he still heard voices when he picked up a stick. Vlad stayed silent and avoided her gaze, which she took as confirmation. She wondered what kind of sins he might have committed in his past life to be experiencing that. She remembered the day he was struck by black lightning tinged with a purple glow. What made it even more unsettling was that the sky had been perfectly clear. Zemina advised him to lay low in the shop for a while, for the new bishop was known to be superstitious, and anyone who seemed unusual risked being burned at the stake. Vlad's expression turned to disgust. He asked why she would say something like that. Zemina explained that she was only looking out for him. She reminded him of the rumors, how people were already talking behind his back. She urged him to stop loitering outside and warned that, in the worst-case scenario, the church might step in and take him away. Vlad brushed off the warning, certain he wouldn't get in trouble just for looking at a sword. Zemina, clearly frustrated, thought he was being clueless. She told him he might as well buy the sword already. Our MC then shared that the sword was expensive. Zemina snapped, asking how expensive it could be if it came from a back-alley blacksmith. She pressed him for the price and even offered to buy it herself. He told her it cost 5 gold. Zemina could only utter, "What the hell?" It was surely expensive. She complained that it was ridiculous for a piece of metal to cost 5 gold. Then her mind wandered, thinking of all the things she could buy with that much money. Vlad looked away, sweat forming on his face. He quietly admitted that he understood. 5 gold was enough to let someone live without working for a whole year. Suddenly, a loud, angry voice rang out. "Stupid metal chunk, huh?" It was the old blacksmith. He shouted at them to leave, saying they had no right to even look at that sword. It wasn't meant for slum kids like them. Zemina fired back. She asked who else would buy his sword if not people from the slums. She mocked him, calling him an old man and saying he must be out of his mind. The old man clenched his fist, shaking with frustration. He asked if they had any manners at all. Zemina just couldn't shut up. She said there was no need to cause a scene over some knight's sword. Then, with a smirk, she asked if his time had come or something. His anger peaked. He responded with bitter sarcasm, saying she was right. His time on Earth was running out. Then, in a fit of rage, he called her a bitch. He said they were just bratty kids and told them to go back to washing dishes at their shop. Zemina was furious. She yelled back, demanding to know why he'd insult her like that, and shouted that she was a grown woman. Vlad held her back, telling her not to get worked up. He grabbed her and started to leave, calling the blacksmith old man as they walked away. Zemina struggled in his grip, insisting she hadn't done anything wrong. The blacksmith shouted for them to shut their mouths. As he watched them leave, he muttered under his breath, calling Zemina a rotten bitch. He said she was full of venom. Then the old man remembered something. Years ago, 3 kids huddled together in the snow, trying to stay warm. It was them, Vlad, Zemina, and another one. Back then, the blacksmith had been giving them food. Still fuming, he turned back to his shop, gripping his hammer tight. He cursed again, calling her a damn bitch. But then he stopped. He noticed Vlad's footprints, clearly pressed deep into the soil. That meant Vlad had been standing there for a long time. The blacksmith sighed. He muttered that Vlad should focus on surviving instead of dreaming. He picked up the sword Vlad wanted and stared at it. He knew kids like them usually never make it out of the slums. He didn't want his final creation to rot in this place. But as he looked again at the sword, he thought, it was just like Vlad. Just like the kid. It shined in a place where nothing else did. Their town was called Swara. Known for its beauty and prosperity, Swara was the economic heart of the north, thanks to the powerful Bayezid family. It was a beacon of success. But where there's light, there are always shadows. In the slums, far from Swara's shining streets, filth and poverty took root. The streets were dirty, the houses were broken down. Among them stood a seedy bar where men drowned themselves in liquor and sought comfort from women. Then a scream suddenly echoed from the second floor. All heads turned toward the hallway. A half-naked man was dragging a woman by her hair, furious, accusing her of scamming him. The woman, just as angry, demanded to know what he was talking about. Then the man claimed to know better, boasting about his 20 years as a mercenary, and said she tried to sell him fake medicine. Vlad walked in, carrying a wooden box. The man spotted him and called out, asking Vlad to go fetch the madam, calling him the candle maker and saying his timing was just perfect. Vlad, clearly annoyed, told him that if he wanted to meet the madam, he needed to pay in gold, not silver. The man scoffed, saying their filthy business wasn't worth gold. Then he insulted Vlad by suggesting he send his mother instead. Vlad's expression turned visibly irritated. The man, now red with rage, pointed at Vlad and accused him of selling a fake time candle, yelling that it burned down before he could even use it. Vlad sighed, tucked the wooden box under his arm, and calmly suggested that if the man couldn't afford real fun, maybe he should just go and do it with his wife. The man's face turned crimson. Veins bulged on his head, eyes wide, jaw clenched, as he stammered in disbelief. Vlad, still unfazed, simply noted how loud he was. Then he challenged him to test the candle. He pointed at the standing clock and asked if the man could see it. He proposed they watch and see if the candle truly lasted 5 minutes. He added that if the candle burned out early, the man could do whatever he wanted to the woman he was dragging. Still furious but now uncertain, the man asked why he should trust any of them. Vlad's eyes grew colder. He stepped closer and repeated the challenge, daring him to see for himself. Then, with a sharp tone, he warned that if the candle did last the full 5 minutes, the man would have to take a beating himself. The rage began to drain from the man's face. Under Vlad's gaze, he shrank, now clearly shaken by the intensity in those eyes. Not long after, our MC struck a match. He knelt before the candlestick, lit it, and stared calmly ahead. Now, it was time to see who the real scammer was, he uttered. The man stared at the candlestick, eyes wide with tension, teeth clenched, and sweat slowly trailing down his face. Both he and Vlad watched closely. Vlad stood tall, with his arms crossed, calm and confident. The man, still gripping the woman by her hair, waited nervously. Below them, a crowd had gathered, watching in silence. Vlad kept his gaze locked on the candle, intense and unwavering. Then, the flame went out, even though the candle still had inches left. The man whipped his head toward the clock, his face stiff with dread. Sweat poured down as he frantically tried to recall the exact time they had started. Panic set in. His eyes bulged, realizing he was trapped. Vlad called out to him. And then, a wooden sword slammed into the man's face. He let out a cry of pain as blood splattered and his body fell backward. The woman he had held watched silently from the side. Vlad's eyes were cold. He declared that the 5 minutes were up. He then raised his knee and drove a powerful kick into the man's back. The force sent him crashing into a room, landing face down on the floor. Vlad stood at the doorway, then stepped in. The man tried to lift himself, only to freeze as he saw Vlad lock the door behind them. Vlad stared down at him, voice cold and firm. He told him he was dead. The man, trembling and bleeding, reached out with one hand, begging for Vlad to wait. But our MC didn't hesitate. He struck him again with the wooden sword, each blow laced with rage. He called the man a scammer, hitting harder as he mocked the idea of a so-called mercenary being that out of shape. Furious, Vlad clenched his teeth, brows furrowed, and drove his point home with every strike. He reminded the man of his earlier insult about his mother. He told him to think twice before making cruel jokes, because just like him, some people didn't have mothers. The man's screams echoed through the building until Vlad barked at him to shut up. As night gave way to dawn, the town basked under a clear blue sky. It was the next day. In a quiet room, Vlad sliced into a sausage, calmly speaking. He said someone had tampered with the candle. It hadn't burned for the full 5 minutes. He asked again if the person he was talking to understood what it meant. Across from him sat Jorge, a strong, middle-aged man with a muscular frame and closed eyes. He gave a short grunt in response, letting Vlad know he was listening. Suddenly, a loud voice rang out. A woman, clearly angry, stormed into the room demanding to know who dared mess with their candles. Vlad replied that they'd need to investigate. The woman crossed her arms, agreed, then told him to go and find the culprit. Vlad pointed to himself, confused, unsure how he was supposed to do that. Then she casually confessed that actually, she had caught the bastard already. Vlad immediately asked who. In the end, she admitted it was all her doing. She had tampered with the candles just to earn a bit more from the drunk customers. She was the Madam of Rose's Smiles. Her name was Marcella. Marcella smiled brightly while Vlad and Jorge sat there speechless. As he descended the stairs, he let out a sigh, realizing he had beaten up that man for nothing. All over a tampered candle. It reminded him of how powerless he really was. Just another employee in a place full of bigger problems. When he reached the bottom of the stairs, a man greeted him with arms crossed and a smug smile. He said he was proud of what Vlad had done the day before. With a smirk, he added that something always seemed to happen when he was away. Behind him stood a few lackeys, each one wearing the same arrogant look. The man slung an arm around Vlad's shoulder and asked how much he earned in tips from selling candles. They needed money, said they were broke. His name was Burley. Vlad, clearly annoyed, gave him a sharp glare and asked what he was really after. Burley raised his hands in mock surrender, telling Vlad not to be so serious. He said he wasn't asking for free money. What he had in mind was a trade. Vlad narrowed his eyes but asked him to explain. Burley grinned and said if Vlad gave him some cash, he'd give something back in return. A pickpocket, the gangster claimed. Then with Burley was a young, beaten-up boy he dragged forward by the hair. He asked Vlad if he recognized the kid. His face was bruised, eyes barely open. Then Burley named his price. 40 silver to take the boy back. He called it a good deal. Vlad's expression darkened. He quietly asked about the boy's fingers and ankles. Burley replied with sarcasm, saying he wouldn't have come to Vlad if he'd already cut them off. He said he just taught the kid a lesson. Vlad didn't respond at first. He clenched his jaw, closed his eyes, and stood in silence, frustrated. Then he threw a pouch of silver onto the ground. Burley grinned and said Vlad was always reliable. Vlad told them next time they should just kill the kid instead of dragging him to him. The child flinched in fear. Burley laughed and said they were gangsters, not murderers. Vlad growled that they were still scamming their own family's employee. As they walked away, Burley told the others he knew our MC would accept the deal. He explained that Vlad had influence over the vagrant kids. That's why they used them. Vlad turned to the child and called him by name, Ned. Ned immediately apologized, trembling, and said he really tried to stay out of trouble. Vlad asked if he had any broken bones. Ned said no. Our MC pointed toward the door and told him to leave before he gave him one. Ned quickly bowed and rushed off, thanking Vlad as he left. Left alone, Vlad sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. There goes my goal of 5 gold, he muttered. At the same time, down by the dock, the sun shimmered over the blue water as workers moved busily between boats. A man was writing something down commenting that the kid was lucky to keep all his fingers. He lifted his arm, showing 2 missing fingers with a wry smile. It was Harvin, a whale hunter from Captain Hoover's family. He remembered the day he lost those fingers, the pain, the blood, and the young Zemina and Vlad crying beside him. He said that day had become a lesson for everyone in the area. Harvin was speaking with Vlad. He brought up the issue about the tampered candles. Our MC was surprised he already knew. Harvin explained that the rumors had been around for a while, but no one really believed them. He added that even though Marcella was the one making the candles, she didn't seem like the kind of person who would do something like that. Vlad agreed. He had thought the same, but he believed Jorge knew as well. Still, with confidence, he said that neither Marcella nor Jorge were the type to do something like that. Harvin nodded, but added that if they did do it, there had to be a good reason. Vlad asked what kind of reason. Harvin replied with certainty. There was a 90% chance they needed money, and fast. Then, with a firm tone, he warned Vlad to be cautious. There's usually only one reason an organization needs urgent funds: a war, a brutal conflict with another group. An image came to mind. Men covered in blood, clashing violently in narrow alleyways. There were 5 major bosses who ruled Sawara's slums. Jorge, the whore's knight. Black Bear, the swine butcher. Dice, the gambler, Captain Hoover, the whale hunter, and one-armed Jack, the money bug. Our MC admits that in the quiet corners of life, danger often crept in silently, hidden in shadow, inching closer without a sound. Vlad appeared, seated at a long table filled with candlesticks, a line of people stretching in front of him. This was one of those moments where darkness crept closer without anyone noticing. Then someone called out, "Hey, kid!" as a shadow of a hook appeared. It was one-armed Jack. He was looking for Vlad's boss. Vlad turned to him, eyes sharp and full of warning. Jack met his gaze without flinching. The air grew heavy. Vlad knew that in places like this, accidents struck without warning, and destruction came without notice. Vlad masked his surprise behind a stern expression, but inside he was shocked. One-armed Jack's presence meant something serious. He wondered if this was part of a preparation for war. Suddenly, a man in line yelled at him, calling him a brat and demanding to know if he hadn't heard their boss. He barked at Vlad to reveal where his boss was. Vlad frowned. With dry sarcasm, he feigned ignorance, saying he was just a humble candle seller and wouldn't know such things. That answer pushed the man over the edge. He slammed his fist onto the table, smashing the box and scattering the candles. He screamed at Vlad to go find his boss. Even as the candles clattered to the floor, Vlad stayed calm, his gaze locked on the man. The man raised his fist again, knocking more candles down. The scene was a mess, splintered wood, broken candles everywhere. He stood in front of our MC, fist on the table, with his gang standing behind him. Jack was among them, silent. Vlad remained seated, unfazed. A crowd gathered. Female staff stood frozen, some wide-eyed, others gasping in disbelief. Among the men, faces reflected the same shock. One man, mid-drink, forgot to swallow, and water spilled down his chin. Zemina covered her mouth, stunned. Vlad, still calm, let out a quiet remark. He began picking up the fallen candles, lamenting that all the expensive ones were broken, and there would be no sales today. His reaction only made the man angrier. The man growled that Vlad clearly didn't understand the situation he was in. As our MC crouched, still calmly collecting candles, he told the man, Hyung, or older brother, fuckfeet. The man blinked in confusion and asked what he just said. Vlad didn't flinch. Though his tone was steady, his clenched jaw and burning eyes showed restrained anger. He firmly told the man again to move his damn feet. The man's face flushed red with rage, and without hesitation, he lunged at Vlad, shouting and calling him a bastard. Our MC knew a fight was just a smaller version of war, so when the man's knee came flying toward his face, he didn't even blink. He moved fast, effortlessly dodging the strike. His action carried intent, like he had anticipated this moment all along. He grabbed his wooden sword and struck the bastard with precision. Vlad then struck at the man's feet, aiming to throw him off balance. And without hesitation, he raised his wooden sword once more. His eyes blazed with fierce determination. The next strike hit the man square in the face. His eyes rolled back, turning white, and a tooth flew out. The crowd gasped louder than before. The women's mouths hung open. The men looked just as stunned, frozen, wide-eyed. The monkey surely fell in love. Our MC's eyes glowed as he thought of this. There's one unchangeable rule in the back alleys. The rule is simple. The one who stands is the victor. The one who falls stays down. Vlad stood over the man, his presence firm and commanding. The man's gang members grew furious. They looked ready to charge. They shouted, furious that Vlad dared attack their man in front of them all. But Jack raised his hooked arm and ordered them to stop. Of course, the whole gang stopped in an instant. With a calm smile, Jack said he liked Vlad. He brought his hand and hooked together in a clapping gesture. No sound came, of course. He had only one hand. He mentioned this with amusement, asking for understanding. Vlad looked at Jack with a serious expression and calmly told him he didn't discriminate against people with disabilities. Jack burst into laughter and called him a crazy fucker. But once the laughter faded, tension returned. Jack leaned in, resting his hook under Vlad's chin, and told him they'd have a private chat later. He kept his intimidating presence as he asked which bum Vlad had taken away. Vlad shot back, saying that if Jack couldn't remember, they were probably already dead. Just then, a voice called out, "What's going on here?" Both Jack and Vlad turned toward it. Jorge appeared, walking in with his own group of men. He teased Jack, saying if he'd given notice, he could have prepared grilled meat for him. Jorge approached with confidence. Jack replied dryly, saying they weren't exactly close. Jorge suggested they continue their talk upstairs since the ground floor was full of guests. Jack said to skip the meat and go straight to the liquor. With a sharp look, Jorge hinted that Marcela's not one to disappoint when it came to hospitality. Jack met Jorge's gaze with a grin and agreed. They'd have a taste of the grilled meat after all. With that, Jack and his men started heading up the stairs. Vlad let out a sigh, muttering how close he felt to death just now. He began collecting the broken candles, placing them carefully into a new box. He quietly wondered how many candles they'd destroyed during that whole mess. Then, someone called out to him, "Rising Star." It was Jack again. He approached Vlad, noting how Jorge had praised him, which confirmed his own good instincts. Jack then offered an invitation. If Vlad ever got tired of the candle smell, he could come work for him. He said he'd like to have someone like Vlad in his gang. Vlad rubbed his neck and replied that he was fine where he was. He got paid, fed, and had a roof over his head. Jack laughed loudly and said his gang could give him all of that too. He tossed Vlad a coin, and our MC caught it easily. It was gold. Vlad looked at it and told Jack it was too much. Jack just smirked and said if Vlad joined him, he'd get plenty more where that came from. After all, he was the money bug. Jack and his men exited, saying the day's free meal had been delicious. Vlad watched them go, noticing how Jack actually looked. Happy. He started to wonder, maybe things worked out well. From upstairs, Zemina called out to him. She pointed over her shoulder and told Vlad that Jorge was looking for him. Vlad made his way up and sat beside Jorge at the counter. His eyes widened as Jorge presented something. It was a short sword, almost like a long knife. Jorge told him he originally planned to give it to him later, but with how things were going, it had to be now. With a serious look, Jorge told Vlad to keep it with him at all times. Vlad broke his stare from the small sword and looked over to Jorge and Marcela. The atmosphere in the room was tense, somber, and still. Yet Vlad couldn't shake the feeling that the earlier conversation between Jorge and Jack was headed for a catastrophe. Jorge advised him to stop selling candles. Vlad raised an eyebrow, asking what he should do instead. Handle money collection? Patrol the area? Jorge explained. Intel suggested that Jack had begun bringing in outsiders, mercenaries who were once knights. Vlad asked if they were like him. Jorge nodded. Yes, just like him. Jack now had overwhelming numbers behind him. Even then, Jorge, despite being a former knight, had always been a difficult opponent. After all, no matter how large the flock, sheep are no match for a wolf. But skilled swordsmen trained like knights would change everything. The balance of power would shift. If the intel was true, they were at a disadvantage. That's why he needed Vlad, Jorge admitted. Our MC, still confused, asked why he was the one being chosen. Jorge simply told him he would soon be receiving his first mission. Later, Vlad thought about Harvin. Despite his missing fingers and physical limitations, Harvin had managed to teach himself how to read and do math. Now he was working under Captain Hoover. From that, Vlad came to a quiet conclusion. With enough effort and discipline anyone could learn, they could grow, they could become something more. As he swung his wooden sword, that thought stayed with him. Then he heard it. His name. There was no one around, but the voice rang clearly inside his mind. It told him to narrow the angle of his elbow during the downward swing. Annoyed, Vlad gritted his teeth. It had been a month since the voice began whispering, ever since he was struck by that jet-black lightning. Now, every time he picked up a sword, or even something similar, it came. Demonic whispers. He closed his eyes, brows furrowed in irritation. Clicking his tongue, Vlad muttered that he'd need to buy holy water before ever thinking about getting a proper sword. He knew better than to answer the voice. If he did, it would only linger longer. So instead, he focused. Eyes closed, sword gripped in both hands, he took his stance. He just vowed to give his best. He delivered his first strike and opened his eyes, gaze sharp and focused. Immediately, the voice told him to narrow his stance. He obeyed. And Vlad knew something was different. He admitted that earlier he was just swinging and swinging. But now, the sword cut through the air with a force and clarity he hadn't felt before. The thing he just did was called a sword path. At the back of his head was a silhouette of a swordmaster. Stunned, Vlad lowered the blade. He then uttered, "What the hell has made its way into my head?" Few days later, a full moon lit up the snowy mountains. A man wiped blood from his sword and muttered, "You just can't fool age." His breath was visible in the icy air as he complained about the bitter cold. It was so freezing he could feel it down to his bones. Then, something in the woods caught his attention. Smirking, he said that while one explanation might be reasonable, the other two options were either plain stupidity or foolishness on purpose. He then walked toward the woods. In the dark, he called out, saying he already knew someone was there and that they might as well come out. After a moment, a voice responded, calling him Sir Stanga. He confirmed his identity, then asked if he was the one called Vlad. Vlad stepped out of the shadows wearing a dark robe. His glowing blue eyes stood out against the darkness. Stanga mentioned he'd heard the guide would be a man from the slums, blonde hair, blue eyes, someone people often mistook for a noble. Our MC then handed him a letter, saying it was from his boss. After reading it, Stanga learned that the enemy group had hired a mercenaries who used to be knights, and that's why they needed his help. Our MC then said, with full confidence, that he'd be the guide. They'd reach the destination in 2 days by nightfall. He turned and started walking, leaving Stanga staring after him, surprised by the arrogance. The retired knight sighed and frowned, questioning if he should just follow someone so stupid. Vlad turned back and calmly assured him he knew what he was doing, but Stanga wasn't convinced. He narrowed his eyes and said someone couldn't be smart while doing something stupid. Vlad had no idea what Stanga was trying to say, or why he was calling him stupid. The former knight then threatened that if our MC got them lost, things wouldn't end well for him. That irritated Vlad. His cold glare said everything. Without a word, he turned again and told Stanga to just keep up. He didn't want his first mission messed up. Stanga was left looking a little foolish. He purposely made himself look threatening, but our MC just ignored him. Then he smirked quietly. He was starting to get why Jorge liked the kid. He admitted he had potential. He could become someone useful. Later in their journey, snow began to fall heavily. They found shelter in a cave and lit a bonfire to stay warm. While sitting by the fire, Vlad kept staring at Stanga. Of course, the former knight noticed. He finally asked why he was staring. With a playful grin, he joked, "Was it the first time seeing a retired knight?" Vlad admitted it was his first time seeing a retired knight up close. Stanga teased him, wondering if he was just some country kid. He then asked where Stanga came from, and he said Dikia. Vlad pretended to be impressed and made fun of it. Stanga, slightly pissed, warned Vlad not to push it or he might get hurt. Our MC shrugged it off and told him not to say things like that. He had heard knights often hide threats in their jokes. As he spoke, he opened a pack of meat. The smell caught Stanga's attention. He smiled and commented that the jerky looked good. He asked if he has his share too. Vlad replied that the boss only packed enough for him. He asked if Stanga didn't bring his own food. Stanga said he did, but when he looked at it, he seemed a little disappointed. It was freaking dry. Vlad then placed the meat near the fire to cook it. The smell filled the cave, and Stanga couldn't stop looking at it. He ignored his own food completely. Suddenly, the retired knight asked if Vlad had any questions. Our MC was confused and asked why ask him all of a sudden. Stanga said he would answer one question for each jerky Vlad gave him. He even added that it was a rare chance to talk to a knight. Vlad kept eating and looked at him, acting suspicious. He then told him he could just ask how many pieces of meat he wanted. Stanga, of course, insisted that he had pride. He said knights only take things when they give something in return. But Vlad clarified and reminded him that he was retired. But the old man said he still lived by those rules. Our MC then cut him off and asked for his name. Stanga answered. Next, Blondie asked for his age. The knight answered 42. Then he asked if he knew how to use aura. Stanga smiled and said, Vlad didn't seem like much at first, but there was something more beneath the surface. He explained that not all knights could use aura, and using it in battle was even harder. Vlad got tired of the vague answers, and asked again directly if he could use it. Stanga just smiled again, and didn't answer right away. Few seconds later, our MC suddenly had an idea. He held out all the meat like a bribe. Then the two had a playful stare-down. Stanga looked away first. He reached for his sword and reminded Vlad that a knight only takes what he has earned. The knight then drew his sword and said that sometimes he just did things his way, and besides, he'd been stuck eating dried meat for days. Vlad was surprised and wondered if he was really going to see what he asked for. Stanga stood up with his eyes closed, holding his sword upright. Then he opened one eye. Vlad, confused, asked why he closed his left eye. The knight concentrated and uttered he needed to bring their world deep into his soul. Stanga's closed eye glowed blue, a sign of aura. He told Vlad to watch carefully. Blue aura spread over the blade. This was the essence of a knight, he uttered. Stanga then opened his eyes. The aura was so strong it gave off wind, making Vlad's hair whip around. He shielded his face, but kept watching. Under the full moon and dark sky, Vlad saw Stanga's glowing sword and serious expression. He finally understood what aura truly looked like. Later in town, a familiar wall came into view. Stanga looked irritated, his eyes rolled up and his face sour. He said he wasn't mad about the way he looked, but about how he felt. He was too proud to be crawling through a dirty hole in a wall. Vlad told him they couldn't risk the front gate. They had to stay hidden. The retired knight stayed quiet and didn't meet Vlad's eyes. Our MC promised him a warm bath once they arrived, coaxing him to move. They walked quietly through a dark, dirty alley. Stanga broke the silence, saying the quietness felt weird. Vlad replied that it was probably just late. Then they both froze, surprised by what they saw. The knight asked if this kind of thing was normal there. Vlad, wide-eyed and shocked, said no. The alley was filled with bodies and blood. A fight had clearly broken out. Vlad, face hidden by shadows, said they should split up. He would guide Stanga to a back door only insiders know about. The knight asked what our MC would do. He said he'd use the front gate to draw attention, then told Stanga to meet him later, and took off running. Not long after, he reached a door soaked in blood. Breathing heavily, he wiped sweat from his chin as he looked around. Inside was chaos. Furniture was broken, and the floor was smeared with food and blood. Someone spoke, welcoming him in. It was Jorge. The leader sat on a stool, half naked, while Marcela wrapped bandages around him. He told Vlad the money bugs attacked first, and they were stronger than expected. He admitted that people who handle money are on a different level. Vlad, worried, asked if he was okay. Jorge explained that it had been a long time since he fought someone on a knight's level, so that's why he ended up like this. He then changed the topic and asked if Vlad had completed his mission. Our MC said he had, explaining that he guided Stanga to take the back route and expected him to arrive by now. Jorge's expression hardened. With a cold, determined look, he said they'd strike back at the money bugs tomorrow and end it. Switching topics again, he asked how Stanga was doing. Vlad replied that he seemed fine, and more than that, he actually seemed like a good person. Jorge agreed, saying Stanga was kind. Our MC added that he was still quick on his feet too. Jorge then asked if his old pal had lost weight, saying staying healthy was important for living long. Vlad confidently said yes, and casually mentioned that Stanga could use aura. He said he felt sure tomorrow would go their way. Jorge froze. All he could say was, "What?" Just then, Vlad noticed someone approaching and guessed that Stanga must have arrived. The sound of footsteps grew louder. Jorge's voice turned sharp. He pressed Vlad again about the aura, wanting to be sure. Vlad, confused by the urgency, insisted he'd seen it with his own eyes. Suddenly, Jorge drew his sword and told Vlad to stay behind him. With a fierce glare, Jorge revealed the truth. Stanga didn't know how to use aura. Vlad, stunned, tried to understand what was happening, but before he could speak further, the door opened. Stanga walked in, his cape and sword stained with blood. He calmly acknowledged Jorge's presence, and the two turned to him in silence. The supposed Stanga then uttered, "Long time, no see, Jorge." 2 nights ago in the forest, when Stanga was wiping blood from his sword, he let out a comment that age couldn't be fooled. He spoke about how the winter wind was so bitter, it felt like it seeped into his opponent's bones. After a few seconds, he glanced behind him after hearing a noise. He then sat on a rock. Behind him lay a bloodied body, surrounded by scattered weapons. He continued speaking to himself, questioning if his opponent was truly foolish, or if it had been deliberate. The man on the snow-covered ground was the real Stanga. Back in the present, the imposter stood in front of Jorge. Vlad stood cautiously behind him, watching. The imposter commented on how much Jorge had changed. Jorge responded coldly, asking why he was there now after all this time. The imposter explained that Count Gaidar had died. Jorge was visibly shocked. In his mind, he imagined the old man's body lying still on a stone bed, sword resting over his chest. The image didn't seem real. The imposter poured golden liquor into a shot glass and explained that the death hadn't been announced yet because of complications, but soon it would be. Their eyes met. Tension filled the air. Jorge's fury was barely contained. The imposter held up the shot glass. The liquor sparkled under the dim light. He toasted to the pitiful Count Gaidar. Jorge snapped. His eyes burned with rage, and his whole body tensed. He lunged forward, yelling, driven by fury. As Jorge rushed in, the imposter remained calm, still staring at the liquor. In the reflection of the glass, Jorge's sword was visible just before it struck. Jorge's slash shattered the glass. The liquor flew everywhere. Debris scattered. Jorge, Vlad, and Marcella were all caught off guard. The imposter's robe fluttered in the gust created by the strike. He stayed calm, ignoring the destruction around him, and made another toast, this time to the new Count Gaidar Sigmund. This drove Jorge over the edge. He shouted the imposter's real name, Godin, and attacked again with full force. Their swords collided. The clash was violent and sent more debris flying. The sound echoed through the room. Jorge gritted his teeth and pushed forward with everything he had. Godin, calm and composed, said he was there under orders from Count Sigmund. His mission was to bring Jorge, the deserter knight, back. Jorge roared back that Sigmund was not his lord. Their blades kept clashing as the room was torn apart around them. Godin added that the Count never believed Jorge would come quietly. Nor was it possible to even happen. Furniture cracked, walls splintered. The fight looked like a brutal dance. Their feet moved quickly. Sparks flew as steel hit steel. Vlad moved fast to shield Marcella and pulled her to safety. Together, they ran through a door, entering the second-floor hallway. Downstairs, people shouted up at them, asking what was going on. Vlad turned and told Burley to bring everyone up immediately. He started explaining that Jorge needed a backup, but then was cut off. Before he could finish, Jorge's body crashed through the room. Everyone froze, then Vlad turned around. Marcella's face showed pure shock. The people downstairs stared in disbelief as Jorge's body fell from the second floor. At the ruined part of the wall, Godin stood tall. His stance and posture showed that he had been the one to send the gang leader flying. He stared down with cold eyes, calling Jorge's choices naive and foolish. His body then hit the ground hard, stirring up dust and debris. The crowd gathered around Jorge's fallen body. Fear filled their eyes as they asked what had just happened. Jorge, still lying on the floor, coughed as he tried to recover. Up on the second-floor railing, Godin stood with confidence, watching as Jorge struggled to rise. His face remained unreadable, waiting for what came next. Suddenly, a small sword came flying through the air toward him. Without even moving his stance, Godin intercepted it with his own blade. He turned to see who threw it. It was Vlad. Vlad stared directly at the enemy. In the next moment, he jumped down, aiming to strike. Vlad shouted for Jorge to dodge, but Jorge, overwhelmed by pain, could only groan as he tried to get up. Godin landed with a crushing blow. Jorge screamed in pain, but managed to catch himself on his knees. Now facing sideways, Godin stood tall, while Jorge knelt before him. Godin looked at him and asked why he hadn't just followed orders that day. Jorge, gritting his teeth, answered defiantly. He said he wasn't the kind of man who would follow dogshit orders that meant nothing, but Godin, with unwavering eyes, responded that Jorge was a knight, and knights follow commands. Jorge clenched his jaw and prepared to strike back. Behind him, his men stood up, weapons raised, ready to fight with him. Godin looked at them all. Then he spoke. He said the night had gone on too long, that he just wanted to rest. He then closed his eyes. Footsteps echoed down the stairs. Vlad was rushing down as fast as he could. As he got closer, something made him freeze. Godin was holding his sword with both hands, blade upright. His aura started to gather. Vlad's face turned pale. He screamed at Godin, begging him not to go through with it. But Godin opened his eyes. Calm, focused, intense. Vlad shouted again, doing everything he could to stop what was coming. But it was too late. In the next moment, everyone in front of Godin was cut down. They didn't even have time to react. Jorge and his men were all struck, bloodied, and stunned. Not a single one could escape the attack. Godin didn't stop. He moved faster than the eye could follow. His strikes left only blurs of light in the air. Vlad shielded his eyes, unable to understand what was happening. The pressure from his sword caused light to explode through the room. It was blinding. The light kept growing, followed by the sounds of destruction, like a storm of blades crashing down all at once. The entire room was torn apart. Smoke filled the air. Everything had been destroyed. Vlad managed to stay on his knees, coughing hard from the dust and smoke. He opened one eye to look around. What he saw left him speechless. His comrades lay on the ground, lifeless, buried in the wreckage of the fight. Vlad's face twisted with anguish and despair as he cursed under his breath. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw someone. Jorge's face was bloodied. Vlad tried to call his name but couldn't finish. The ground was soaked in blood, and Vlad froze at the horrifying sight. Memories came flooding back. Jorge sitting beside him in a bar, being the first person to ever reach out to a kid scraping by in a back alley. Jorge had believed in him when no one else did. To Vlad, he was the strongest person he'd ever known. Under the pale blue glow of the moon, Godin held his opponent's head. Vlad's eyes widened as he saw Jorge's head separated from his body. In that instant, his world shattered. Our MC immediately stood up. He grabbed the sword lying nearby, his expression torn between rage and grief. Letting out a furious scream, he raised the blade and charged forward. The force of his attack actually made Godin step back. Godin was caught off guard, recognizing something familiar: sword path. He stared at Vlad, surprised that a slum kid could show such refined technique. It was impressive, he uttered. Fueled by pain, Vlad launched another attack, screaming, desperately trying to end Godin. But before his blade could reach, Godin countered with a powerful kick that sent him flying across the room. He landed hard, the sword slipping from his grip. Godin watched him in silence. He saw something in the kid, a raw, natural instinct. Vlad had twisted his body just right to avoid a fatal blow. That kind of reflex couldn't be taught. Vlad groaned in pain, the voice in his head telling him to breathe, to stay conscious. Godin then turned away, deciding not to kill him. Not yet. Even if the boy came back one day for revenge, Godin saw no reason to stop him. There was potential here. It reminded him of his own past, when Jorge had once saved him. A smile crept onto Godin's face as he walked toward Vlad and told him that knights always take a fair price. Vlad was confused. Godin admitted he had lied. He wasn't Stanga. He wasn't 42. He'd taken too much from Vlad earlier, so he returned the meat. But, in exchange, he was taking Jorge's head. It was his rightful prize as a victor. Their eyes met. Vlad was shaking with rage. He clenched his teeth and promised he would kill him one day. Godin closed his eyes calmly. Then, without another word, he turned his back and walked away, saying that in Vlad's current state, even dreaming of revenge was useless. Vlad trembled with fury, his jaw clenched so hard it hurt. He screamed after him, his voice filled with pain and hatred. Godin's silhouette faded into the darkness, Jorge's severed head visible in his hand. Vlad's tears mixed with the blood and dust as he cried out once more, vowing that he would make him pay. He'd just have to wait. Zamina helped our MC walk through the narrow alleyway under the night sky. Vlad could barely keep himself upright. He pressed his hand against his stomach where Godin had hit him hard. The pain overwhelmed him, and he collapsed. He then thought of the moment after Godin left. Marcella had found him and demanded he get up. She asked if he planned to die in that place. He didn't move. Grief and exhaustion weighed heavily on his face. Her frustration boiled over. She slapped him and told him to pull himself together. She asked if he understood the difference between those who lived in the center of town and those in the slums. The answer, she said, was opportunity. Vlad listened, as Marcella explained that people from the center could fail and still stand back up. They had the luxury of second chances. But for people in the slums, there were no second chances. She told him to look around. The bar was filled with dead bodies, proof of what happened when someone like them failed even once. She continued by saying that one failure meant death, like the bodies lying around them. That was their reality. She held his shoulder firmly, looked him straight in the eye, and told him not to waste this one chance he had. Those words stuck with him. As he limped beside Zamina, she asked if he was okay because of the injury. She offered to slow down, but he told her to keep going. He couldn't afford to stop. Not now. Suddenly, a shout rang out. Someone had found them. The man turned to alert his group. Vlad grabbed Zamina's arm and told her to run. They dashed through the alleyways, pursued by the men. Vlad thought about how everything they had was destroyed. Now they were like hatchlings pushed from a nest, forced to fly on their own. The men eventually lost sight of them. One guessed they had slipped into another alley. Another ordered a full search, promising a reward. He wanted revenge. He was the same man Vlad had humiliated at the bar. The searchers scattered, not noticing a small brown door that was slightly ajar. Behind that door was Vlad and Zamina hiding in complete silence. Vlad realized escape wasn't an option. He told Zamina to wait until things calmed down before leaving. She asked what he would do. He said he'd figure something out, but it was too dangerous for both of them to run at once. Zamina refused to leave. Vlad reminded her of her promise to Marcella, to leave once he found somewhere safe. He told her to go to the convent at dawn, or even to Harvin. Zamina didn't want to go. Her voice grew firm. Vlad snapped, calling her an idiot and asking if she really thought he could protect her in his condition. Tears welled in her eyes, but before she could respond, a voice called out, asking who was there. Zamina quickly grabbed a knife and pointed it at the man whose face was still hidden by shadows. When light finally revealed him, he recognized them. It was the old blacksmith. He asked why they were in his place. Zamina shouted at him not to move. He muttered that it was strange of them to act like they owned the place. Zamina threatened him again. The old man looked at her in silence. Vlad just watched while tears filled her eyes. Understanding their situation, he gently asked her to lower the knife, but Zamina's expression hardened. She demanded that he give the sword hanging in his shop. The old man got confused. She clarified. She wanted that sword. Now alarmed, Vlad told her to put the knife down. She just yelled for the sword. The blacksmith watched her for a moment and saw himself in her, back when he was young and desperate. He realized this was how the slums shaped people. You take to survive. He admitted that he was the same as them. Now, he realized that it was Zamina's turn now. He didn't argue anymore. All he said was that he felt sad for her. Zamina's anger boiled over, her brows furrowed, and she gritted her teeth. Then she raised the knife. Vlad called out, trying to stop her. The old man closed his eyes, bracing himself for the blade. The knife sliced through something. Vlad froze, stunned by what he saw. Zamina had cut her own hair. The blacksmith was stunned. Tears streamed down her face as she held it out to the old man. Her voice trembled as she said it wasn't much, but she promised to pay him back. She begged him to just give the sword to Vlad. The old man stared at her, watching the strands of hair drop to the floor. He looked at the pile of hair, then turned to Vlad. He asked if Vlad was really leaving. Vlad nodded. The old man sighed. Leaving had always been his dream too, but he never had the courage. Still, he saw something in Vlad, a potential that hadn't even taken flight yet. He rubbed his forehead, muttering that they were making things hard for him. He told them to follow him. Later, beneath a snowy night sky, a wagon creaked forward through the alley. The old man pulled it slowly, its wheels groaning under the weight. Someone behind the wagon grumbled about the awful smell. The old man told him to bear with it. It was the only way to move unnoticed. Suddenly, someone called out. 3 armed men appeared and stopped them. They asked what he was doing out so late. The old man recognized them, calling them bastards in his mind. He then tried to stay calm. One of the men narrowed his eyes, clearly suspicious. He asked if the blacksmith was seriously taking out trash this late at night, at such an odd hour. He barked at them for blocking the road and blamed them for causing fights that left his shop full of trash. He said he was just trying to clean it up. The gang member flinched at the old man's outburst. He didn't expect that kind of attitude. Then he noticed someone at the back of the wagon wearing a hood. He asked the old man who was with him. The old man played it off, saying he'd hired help because he was tired of doing it all himself. He pointed to the person in the robe and asked sarcastically if they wanted to help push the wagon instead. The gang member replied that there was no problem with the old man, since he was the only blacksmith in town. But when it came to the kid, he didn't hesitate. He drew his sword and pointed it straight at him. He warned him not to move a muscle unless he wanted to have something sliced off. Then, he cut the hood. What he saw made him freeze. The old man grew tense, a bead of sweat running down his face. The person under the hood with messy red hair scrunched up their face, squinting from the sweat and muttering about how tough it was to make a living. The man inspecting them pulled a weirded-out, confused face and just said, "Pass." The blacksmith asked what exactly he was even looking for. The man admitted they were hunting for Jorge's blonde kid. They couldn't find his body. The old man clicked his tongue and asked if they could move on now, but the guy said he needed to be sure. He told the others to check the wagon. Vlad was actually hidden underneath the trash. Zemina and the old man both looked alarmed. The man ordered one of his guys to check the wagon somewhere else, and the guy responded with a simple, "Got it." He then told two others to go with him and proceed with the inspection. As they walked, the blacksmith began to doubt if this was the right path. He wondered if they should have chosen a different route instead, but he knew that there was no other place they could have gone to. When they arrived, the man inspecting the wagon looked inside and commented on how much junk was crammed in there. Then something seemed to catch his eye. He kept staring and Zemina grew tense. She lowered her gaze and bit her lip. The man paused, then said not to hate him. He was just doing his job. Suddenly, he jabbed into the trash pile with a stick. Zemina flinched and covered her eyes, tears forming while the old man clenched his jaw. The man kept poking around the pile. He then casually stated that he heard Harvin had launched a boat down the river. That threw everyone off. They didn't understand what he meant. He explained that a bunch of people went to check it out. As he kept speaking, the stick stayed dangerously close to Vlad's face. He told them to remember what he said. Then he finally pulled the stick out and said, "Pass." The blacksmith walked forward with the wagon. Without turning back, the man said this favor was payment for the 40 silver his younger brother owed him. Vlad, still hidden and watching quietly, muttered, "Thanks, Otar." The three continued their journey. They finally reached a tunnel in the wall. The old man and Zemina stopped and looked at it. He explained that this was where the trash exited the city. With tears in her eyes, Zemina said goodbye to Vlad, telling him to stay safe. They dumped the wagon's contents, and Vlad, holding his sword tightly, tumbled out with it. The old man watched silently. Zemina stood there, still crying. The blacksmith then uttered that the sword the boy carried. It was something he made from his own dreams, and it was bought with a girl's tears. The full moon hung in the sky, casting its light over the mountains. A sword caught the moonlight, glowing with a fiery shine. Vlad held it upright, staring at the blade. He asked, "Can you hear me?" A voice answered yes. He asked who it was, but the voice admitted it didn't know. Vlad commented on the irony. This voice had so much to say about swords, but didn't even understand itself. Still, our MC admitted that maybe it was for the best. He then offered a deal. He'd help the voice recover its memories, and in return, the voice would be his sword. Even if he was making a deal with the devil, Vlad said he didn't care. He remembered the night he last saw Godin. He admitted his biggest fear wasn't death, it was becoming nothing. The voice agreed. It would teach him everything it knew about swordsmanship. Few days later, on a snowy mountain, troops had set up their base camp. A blue banner with a yellow emblem marked their location. At the center of camp, a map lay spread out with a marker placed on it. A man with black hair stared at it intently, thinking hard. "It's too easy," he muttered. This was Joseph Bayezid, the second son of the Bayezid family. Still frustrated, he repeated, "It's too easy." His thoughts were interrupted when a knight informed him that he had just returned. Joseph turned and greeted the knight by name, Jaeger. Jaeger, with black hair and a black eye patch, stood tall and serious. He then noticed Joseph's troubled look and asked what was wrong. Joseph explained that he was uneasy about how smoothly things were going. Jaeger reported that the monster subjugation was proceeding well and mercenary casualties were low. Joseph asked if deserters were simply being written off as missing. He rubbed his jaw and reflected on how predictable and clean everything felt. He worried that the lack of complications would make others question his leadership. With a firm look, he admitted that his father and the vassals were already watching him closely. The same went for his half-brother, Rudiger, his older brother from another mother. Jaeger said nothing. Joseph, still uneasy, felt the current situation might lead to bigger problems. He suspected that if he failed to rise as the next count, Rudiger's ambitions would become even clearer. The Bayezid family had a long tradition of valuing military strength. His father and older brothers had fought fiercely to claim the title of count. Joseph then mentioned his lack of swordsmen. He only had Jaeger. Jaeger called him young master and said there was more to report. Joseph told him to continue. Jaeger explained there was a strange soldier in the group. Joseph immediately asked if it was a spy from Rudiger, but Jaeger shook his head. That wasn't it. He said Joseph should come see for himself. They walked to a site where a goblin bled from its wounds. Joseph, covering his nose with a handkerchief, remarked at how awful the scene was. 2 goblins were hanging by their arms, covered in cuts. Joseph guessed it looked like a child had clumsily tried using a sword on them. Jaeger told him there was something else. They walked past several injured zombies. Joseph frowned. The cuts were sloppy, and it annoyed him. But then he stopped. One goblin caught his attention. The wounds were cleaner than the others. It wasn't great, but it was better. Joseph kept observing and spotted another goblin with cleaner cuts. He noticed the patterns on their bodies looked similar, but with small differences. He asked Jaeger if they were all done by the same person, every single body. What greeted them was hundreds of dead goblins. Jaeger nodded and explained that the goblins in front of them came in yesterday, while the earlier ones were from last month. Joseph was stunned. Improving that much in just 1 month seemed unreal. He stared at the goblin in front of him, then seriously asked who was responsible for it. In a snowy forest under a clear sky, blood splattered across the white ground. Goblins were severely wounded by sword strikes, fighting back against armed men. A man with a sword and shield shouted at his comrades to tighten the formation, making sure no goblin escaped. One goblin lay on the ground with a spear pointed at its head. The man smirked, thinking the battle was nearly over. He arrogantly ordered the others to go after the remaining goblins. But the atmosphere suddenly shifted. A towering goblin with glowing red eyes stood silently behind the man, weapon raised. The man noticed his comrades staring strangely, but didn't understand why. Then came the strike. The giant goblin smashed him with such force that the ground shook, blinding light flashed and debris flew. The man's body slammed into the snow, painting it red. Everyone froze in shock and fear. The goblin let out a big roar. The warriors braced themselves, uncertain of what the giant goblin would do next. The monster started attacking them one by one. It didn't show any mercy. Panic spread. One shouted that the goblin had broken through Group 5's formation and urged everyone to retreat. They fled in a frenzy. Then, on a nearby cliff, a man on horseback watched the chaos. He scolded the retreating soldiers, warning them they wouldn't be paid if they ran. The soldiers yelled back, claiming they were never told about hobgoblins. They complained that real mercenaries should be dealing with this, and sarcastically invited the man on the horse to fight instead. Angered, the horseman began to draw his sword. But before he could finish, a body dropped beside him. He froze, stunned. Even the horse looked shaken, mouth wide open. The massive goblin continued its brutal assault. The man on horseback watched in horror, a single bead of sweat trailing down his face. In that instant, he realized he couldn't handle the situation. The horse snorted at him in what seemed like disapproval. A man walked toward the scene. He had golden hair and carried a sword at his side. He approached the hobgoblin, leaving others wondering who he was. Someone recognized him. It was Vlad. The crowd began to cheer and hailed him as the praying Riemann. Vlad was focused. Then he charged toward the hobgoblin. The monster didn't understand the situation he was in. Our MC has become fearless. Vlad slashed at the goblin's side, but he knew the cut wasn't deep enough. The voice in his head warned him to dodge. And just in time, he ducked away from the goblin's counter. He charged in again, but missed. Kneeling in the snow, he steadied himself, preparing for the next blow. Frustrated, he cursed under his breath, admitting his strike had failed again. The voice scolded him, and he snapped back, saying only a genius could pull it off on the first try. As the goblin roared and prepared another attack, Vlad decided to take a different approach. The hobgoblin let out another furious roar. Vlad dodged the incoming blow. The monster charged again, but our MC evaded it once more. Now enraged, the hobgoblin raised its weapon with both hands and slammed it down, creating a massive explosion and a cloud of smoke. When the smoke cleared, the goblin stood firm in a battle stance, but Vlad was nowhere to be seen. Vlad promised himself that this time he would land the blow. The hobgoblin then sensed something. Our MC was right behind it, ready to strike. The monster turned, and with a powerful swing, Vlad sliced through it. Back at the camp, Joseph ordered Jaeger to investigate the man known as the Praying Riemann. Jaeger accepted the order without hesitation. Joseph looked at the goblin corpses and shook his head. The cuts were crooked and clumsy, and yet that man had managed to walk the path of the sword in just a month. A small, amused smile tugged at Joseph's lips. The hobgoblin's body lay split clean in half. Then Joseph admitted to himself, this Riemann was a genius. The men loaded the wagon with goblin corpses scattered across the battlefield. One of them muttered how only scraps were left. He had expected better, especially with a hobgoblin involved. Another cheered, praising their captain for handling the fight well. Vlad was now a captain. The man tried chatting with him, but he coldly told him to stop wasting time and finish loading the ones he'd killed. The man replied that he already did and joked that no one would dare claim what belonged to the Riemann. Anyway. Curious, he asked what Vlad planned to do next now that the job was done. He even offered to partner up for future work, trying to sell the idea of teamwork. But Vlad, already walking off, dismissed him flatly. He stated that he didn't work with frauds. That soured the man's mood. He followed after our MC, throwing out a snide remark about his mercenary plaque. He smugly claimed that Vlad couldn't keep using that forever and even suggested he knew someone who could forge a better one. But Vlad stopped, turned, and called him by name. Goethe. With a cold stare, he warned Goethe that running one's mouth could get people killed. In Vlad's mind, if Goethe was just making suggestions, he'd leave it at a warning. But if it was a threat, he'd kill him on the spot. Goethe paled. Trying to recover, he insisted it was only a concern. After all, Vlad was too skilled to be scraping by. Irritated, our MC ordered him to shut up and get back to work. One more word, and he'd lose his head, he added. Goethe backed off, retreating in silence. Vlad then noted to himself that he'd have to deal with Goethe eventually. He walked away from the battlefield, past the wagons and bodies. Some mercenaries nearby started whispering. They wondered if Riemann would go off to pray again. One remarked how consistent he was with it. In the woods, Vlad knelt, one knee down, sword propped up, head bowed. From afar, people admired him. Some said he looked noble, no way he was lowborn. But our MC wasn't praying. He was grumbling to the voice in his head about how he failed to kill the hobgoblin in one strike. The voice replied casually that the secret to one-hit kills was surprise. Vlad frowned and asked what that was supposed to mean. The voice answered, "When you raise your sword, they go whoosh, and that's when you wham." Our MC stared blankly. How the fuck is he supposed to understand that? The voice replied, "How do you not get whoosh, then wham?" Vlad shook his head in disbelief. Deep down, he really wanted to believe in the whoosh wham. As he muttered, "Whoosh whoosh fuck," the people behind him intently prayed with him. Back at the camp, someone placed a bowl of unappetizing soup in front of the great Riemann. He stared at a spoonful, unsure of what kind of meat was in it. Goethe casually told him he didn't know either, and since it was free, he didn't care. Vlad was eating with his crew. Goethe added that it's rare to get food included in jobs like this. Another crewmate said that just proved their employer was a real Bayzid. Someone else said the soup was salty, but still better than starving. Our MC couldn't handle it anymore. He told them to enjoy the meal and stood up from the table. They wondered if he was off to see the priest again. One guy even considered praying himself. Another joked that even if he did, he'd never be like Riemann. A blue tent stood in the camp, marked with a cross. Inside, a priest named Father Andreas greeted Vlad. Our MC bowed and asked if the priest had slept well. The priest smiled and said yes. Then happily mentioned that he heard Riemann was praying again last night, even in the freezing cold. Vlad then replied politely, saying he didn't feel cold when in God's embrace. But in his mind, it was the whoosh-wham shit. He had been practicing it. Father Andreas laughed warmly and joked that Riemann seemed more like a priest than him. Then, a small boy came over and told the priest that breakfast was ready. The priest thanked the boy, Jean, and invited Vlad to eat. Even though he said he didn't come for food, the priest insisted. They began a short prayer. Our MC kept his eyes open, while Jean closed his eyes, hands pressed together. The priest peeked at him with one eye and smiled. To him, Riemann looked deeply devoted and serious, still holding on to his faith, even in a humble tent. At that moment, Father Andreas silently decided he would guide Riemann, a young man destined to shed blood in battle. He believed it was God's will. After the prayer, he urged Riemann to eat. Our MC thanked him and accepted. Inside, he was secretly excited. Wheat bread and hot soup. This is what real food looks like. Just as he was about to take a bite, Father Andreas started talking about his swordsmanship. He said word had spread to Joseph, and Yager came by to ask about Raiman. Vlad, confused, simply said, and then, with a proud smile, Father Andreas said he gave Riemann a recommendation. He added that he was excited to see how Riemann would grow. Father Andreas told him that the Bayezid family was well known in the north, and working for them could give him a better life. He said Riemann deserved that chance. Deep in the woods, Vlad knelt in his usual prayer stance. He spoke to the voice in his head, saying he felt too noticeable. The voice replied that they had no choice, since swordsmanship could only be mastered through experience. Then the voice suggested that being close to the priest might be more dangerous. Our MC agreed, saying he needed to look into that. The voice asked if he now believed it wasn't evil. Since the priest, known for having strong divine powers and once offered the title of bishop, didn't sense anything strange, Vlad was convinced. He asked if he should just run away, but the voice thought maybe people would turn a blind eye to his fake identity because of his skill. Vlad looked worried. If people found out he killed a thieving mercenary, he could be charged with both murder and fraud. The voice joked that our MC was the evil one. Vlad fired back, calling the voice an accomplice. As he held onto his sword, the voice advised that running was safer, especially since there were no witnesses to back up a self-defense claim. Vlad was now sure he needed to escape that night. He even considered bringing Godo along to help him get a forged plaque. But then the voice warned him something was wrong. An advanced knight was approaching. Our MC turned ready to attack. The knight was Yager. Vlad held his stance as Yager approached. Yager noticed and was impressed. Riemann could sense him coming, which showed skill. Yager told him that Sir Joseph wanted to meet him. Vlad lowered his stance, cursing himself for not running earlier. He knew he had to act carefully now. Out loud, he replied calmly, "It's an honor." But in his mind, he stayed cautious. Yager asked if Riemann knew he was coming. Our MC replied that Father Andreas had told him, though he didn't expect it to happen so soon. As Yager studied him, he admired how calm Riemann seemed, especially for someone his age. Yager told him to follow. Vlad watched Yager's back and briefly thought of running, but the voice warned him. If he made a move, a knight like Yager could end his life before he even took 3 steps. Vlad sighed and sheathed his sword. He knew he had no other choice. They reached the leader's tent. Inside, Joseph was reading a blue book and welcomed him. Vlad bowed, saying it was an honor to meet him, while Yager observed closely. Still reading, Joseph asked if Riemann had any trouble at work. Our MC said everyone was thankful for his care. Joseph said he assumed Raiman came from a fallen noble family, judging by his blonde hair and blue eyes. Then Joseph asked if his name was really Raiman. Vlad, still bowing, confirmed, "Yes, sir." Joseph then closed the book and admitted that he had something to confess. Suddenly, Yager slapped Riemann hard across the face. Vlad raised his eyes, now glaring at Yager. Despite having only one eye, Yager looked cold and deadly. Joseph, calm and collected, said he hated liars. Then he addressed him by his real name, Vlad of Sawara. Vlad wiped his cheek and acknowledged that they already knew. Joseph confirmed it and shared what he had discovered, that Vlad's mother had been unmarried and there were no records of his father. Joseph then asked if Vlad knew who his father was. Vlad stared back at him with a proud and almost arrogant look, pointing out how ironic the question was given the circumstances of his birth. Yager suddenly kicked Vlad from behind, causing him to groan and fall to one knee. Yager glared at him, a silent warning to behave. Despite the pain, Vlad held his gaze and didn't back down. Joseph approached him, saying there was no need for manners. That would have just made things funnier. He told Vlad they already figured out why he ran away from Sawara. Yager stepped in again, pressing Vlad about where he learned swordsmanship. Our MC stayed silent, keeping his gaze fixed on Joseph. Joseph noted that Vlad's eyes seemed to hide more than they revealed. Still kneeling, he felt the tension rise. Yager was behind him, sword partly drawn and ready to strike if needed. Vlad bit his lip, and finally spoke. He explained that he had a teacher, someone who appeared and disappeared like a flash of lightning. Joseph was surprised by that answer. Our MC added that the teacher never gave his name, but he had taught him the greatest secrets should never be revealed. There was determination in Vlad's eyes as he said it. Joseph watched him carefully, in awe of Vlad's unwavering gaze. He then apologized for the rough treatment. Vlad didn't ease up. A bead of sweat rolled down his face as he tried to gauge if his story had worked. Joseph admitted he was in a tough spot, so he offered him an opportunity. He asked if Vlad had ever wanted something greater: freedom, power, or even knighthood. Our MC was left speechless. Joseph swore on his name that he would support him. With Vlad still kneeling, it looked as though he were pledging loyalty to a noble lord. Later, wooden swords clashed in a training match. It was between Jaeger and Vlad. Onlookers commented among themselves, some saying Jaeger was holding back. Others speculated whether Vlad would become Jaeger's apprentice, because he showed exceptional skills. They knew he was lucky to have Jaeger as his mentor. With that guidance, he was bound to flourish. Despite trying his best, Vlad was clearly struggling. Jaeger moved too fast, each dodge followed by another strike too quick to block. Jaeger criticized him, calling him an arrogant kid who showed off in front of Joseph without real skill. A brat who doesn't know his place, he added. Vlad knew he wasn't in the same league. He blocked a few attacks, but each one pushed him closer to the edge. He swung at Jaeger but missed. Still, Vlad was more determined than ever. He raised his sword with both hands, pouring all his strength into a single block. He stopped Jaeger's sword head-on and spotted an opening. Vlad swung again, aiming straight at the knight. Our MC was able to land a hit. The onlookers were impressed. Jaeger admitted he was doing well under the circumstances. Vlad gasped for air, knowing it wasn't a true victory. He knew Jaeger had let him land that blow. The knight then told him they'd spar like that twice a day, once in the morning and again in the evening. Vlad was caught off guard by the strict schedule. Jaeger then uttered that wraps up their morning spar. As he walked away, Vlad muttered that the man hadn't even given him a single tip. The voice in his head commented on Jaeger's impressive swordplay. It explained how Jaeger had been trimming away all of Vlad's unnecessary movements with each hit, saying that getting hit was part of the learning process. Vlad sighed and rubbed his head, feeling like no one was on his side. Back in the tent, Joseph asked Jaeger what he thought of Vlad now that he had worked with him up close. Jaeger replied that Vlad could be useful. Joseph agreed, adding that if Vlad had been born noble, the Count would already be interested. Joseph seemed pleased that his instincts about Vlad were correct. Jaeger raised a concern. Vlad was too arrogant and didn't know his place. Joseph wasn't surprised, saying that growing up in the slums would do that. But he believed good manners could be taught well if done slowly. He then uttered that the right person for the job was right in front of him. He looked directly at Jaeger, who stayed silent. Jaeger then finally said that a disloyal sword couldn't be trusted. Joseph agreed, saying that Vlad's act of bowing his head when he saw him wouldn't earn his trust either. It would be better for Vlad to demonstrate his true intentions from within. He vividly remembered the penetrating gaze and Vlad's unwavering declaration that he had a mission to fulfill, regardless of the circumstances. Joseph then added that maybe it's for the best. A relationship where both parties have something to desire from each other is more preferable. Jaeger bowed and showed respect for Joseph's perspective. The Bayezid son also observed that Vlad wasn't quite the wolf just yet. He characterized Vlad as arrogant, untrustworthy, and too full of himself. He advised Jaeger not to rush, saying they needed time to build a big cage. With a sly smile, Joseph said it should be a huge cage, one that tricks the wolf into thinking it's free. In the midst of the snowy forest, Goethe shivered as he complained about the cold and fog. Talking to himself, he regretted not becoming friends with Vlad earlier now that Vlad was working under Jaeger. He should have charmed him much earlier, he added, but he shrugged it off, thinking it's better to just find a way to leave the expedition team in this awful weather. All of a sudden, someone asked him if anything had happened. It was Roderick. Goethe told him that everything was fine. Roderick reminded him to do his job right. Goethe nodded eagerly and told the knight not to worry. But it was all an act. As soon as Roderick turned around, Goethe's smile disappeared. He muttered how Roderick was so uptight. And since he just patrolled, he probably wouldn't be back soon. He used this chance to nap while standing. He was fast asleep. Then a voice woke him up, asking what he was doing there, and that's when Goethe realized Roderick hadn't left yet. He then heard Roderick talking again. This time, the knight was asking someone why they were looking for a kid. Goethe became curious about who he was talking to. He looked in their direction. Roderick said the person was a crazy woman and that he wasn't her child. Goethe found the whole thing odd and wondered why it suddenly went quiet. He grew cautious as he tried to figure out who was there. He slowly crept closer to get a better look. Then he froze. His eyes widened. Roderick started walking, but in the opposite direction from camp. Goethe started to sweat. And then he saw it. Black smoke curled around Roderick's back. What came next terrified him. Beside Roderick was a creature with a skull for a face. Its eye sockets were empty, its mouth hung open, and a long tongue stuck out. It didn't have a solid form, just mist and shadow. Vlad complained about how sore his body was. He wished Jaeger would go easier on him. The voice told him it was a golden opportunity. There were plenty of people who would pay just to spar with Jaeger. It showed how valuable he was as a knight. Vlad replied that it felt more like Jaeger just wanted to beat him up. The voice said that's what made it better. Everyone needs motivation, after all. Our MC muttered that his reasoning was kind of upsetting. Few moments later, someone called out to Vlad, addressing him as Captain Raiman. It was Goethe hiding behind a tree. Vlad asked when he got back, since the expedition team hadn't returned yet. Goethe looked around carefully. He told our MC he was planning to run away later that night. Vlad asked what he was even talking about. Goethe reminded him that he came out of goodwill. He then invited Vlad to meet up later and have some fun. Our MC asked what kind of nonsense he was talking about. Goethe insisted it wasn't nonsense. He said he saw it with his own eyes. He said the woods they were supposed to explore were cursed. Vlad was stunned and just replied, "What?" Goethe pointed out how people were leaving, even with good pay and a decent job. Our MC agreed. He explained that the woods took them, that they weren't deserters, they were rather missing. That caught Vlad's attention. A ghost that drags people into the woods. Goethe told Vlad that he actually saw it. Our MC stayed quiet. Few seconds later, he wanted to smack the shit out of this rascal. He didn't take him seriously. But Goethe kept insisting he was telling the truth. He added that even a knight went missing yesterday. Vlad asked if he meant Sir Roderick. Goethe immediately said yes. He explained that while walking back he realized something. All the missing guys had black hair. Now this time, our MC suddenly looked serious. Later that day, Goethe clenched his fists, cursing in his head. He thought he should have just left instead of doing something nice. He kept mumbling to himself. Jaeger from his horse was watching him. Vlad walked beside the horse. The knight then asked if Goethe could be trusted. Our MC answered no, but he pointed out that Goethe wasn't crazy. Jaeger thought it over. Joseph would probably see it as an opportunity, not just a failed expedition, but maybe a pattern worth investigating. Still, something bothered him. All the missing ones had black hair. And if you haven't figured this out, Joseph has the blackest hair in the troop. Vlad noticed 3 knights standing guard. He figured something was up. Jaeger replied that it was because they were all useless, but he knew he couldn't stay back either. Now that Roderick was gone, someone more skilled had to step in. Goethe pointed out the camp was just ahead. Erun, Roderick's subordinate, introduced himself. The other men then greeted them politely. Jaeger asked if they had searched the whole forest. Erun confirmed. They didn't find even a single clue. He added that, even with ex-hunter mercenaries leading the way, they couldn't find a single footprint. Jaeger thought he'd need to check it out himself. He ordered them to search in groups of 3 and spread out as far as they could see. It was already dusk. Goethe complained that it wasn't fair. He asked how Vlad could do this to him. He called him a fraud, someone who takes advantage of other people's kindness. Our MC told him to stop talking and focus on the search. He promised to get him something later. Jaeger asked if they had found anything. Vlad immediately said no. The knight called him useless. Our MC argued that he came from the city, so he wasn't really familiar with the woods. Jaeger then asked how someone from the city finds missing people in back alleys. Vlad replied that it's simple. He just grabs someone, beats them up, and the missing person gets found. Jaeger was sure now. He was definitely useless. The 2 warriors were speechless. There was nothing left to argue. Jaeger started worrying that nightfall would come soon. He wondered if they should just return to camp. Then something came to mind. He asked if the other groups had searched beyond the river. Goethe answered that they hadn't, since that wasn't part of the planned route. Jaeger thought about how the woods had already been searched, and there were still no clues about Roderick or the strange woman. So he ordered that the scattered mercenaries be gathered. He decided that they were going to cross the river. Goethe immediately blew the whistle. Jager stepped onto the river and said the ice wasn't fully frozen. Vlad crouched and touched the ice. He said winter was ending, but the ice was still strong enough to walk across. Jager figured splitting the groups and crossing might actually work. The mercenaries arrived and asked Goethe if Roderick was found. Goethe said no, and that's why they were called over. Jager told them they'd expand the search by crossing the river. He warned that the river wasn't fully frozen, so they'd split into 3 groups to do it carefully. Everyone followed his command. They began walking on the ice. Goethe groaned. Vlad asked what was wrong. Goethe said he had a bad feeling. Vlad called it nonsense and teased him that he was just being scared. Goethe admitted it. Of course he was scared. He said he wasn't like the rest of them. According to him, a man like himself needs good instincts to survive. And right now, those instincts were warning him. He insisted they shouldn't cross the river. Vlad said he didn't know about instinct, but he did know one thing for sure. If Goethe ran away, his death wouldn't be pretty. Our MC continued by saying it would look like the only witness was fleeing the scene. Even Vlad would have to chase and kill him. Vlad told him to stop whining and just follow. He warned that crossing the river was his best chance at survival. Goethe stepped onto the ice, still complaining that it didn't feel right. He walked slowly and carefully, scared it would crack. Vlad warned that if he kept talking, he'd break the ice himself and toss Goethe in. Goethe backed off and crawled away, saying he couldn't do it. Vlad grabbed him and told him to get up. They were the only ones left behind. Then suddenly, Goethe screamed. Vlad was already annoyed. Then he became alarmed after noticing something. Goethe stuttered, his voice shaky. Corpses. They were under the ice. He eventually screamed and got the troops' attention. He shouted louder this time, yelling that there were dead bodies in the river. Suddenly, the people standing on the ice began to lose their footing. The ice was cracking beneath them. Panic set in. They rushed toward the riverbanks. Then, a hand burst through the ice. Corpses began to rise, clawing their way out like the dead brought back to life. They surrounded the men still stuck on the ice. Trapped. The soldiers looked to Jager. What now? Their eyes seemed to plead. Jager's expression darkened. This wasn't random. It was a trap. An elaborate one. As if someone had predicted every step they'd take. And now, night was falling. Jager knew one thing for sure. Night and darkness do not belong to the living. At the campsite, someone knelt before the altar in prayer. It was Father Andreas, with Jean beside him. In the middle of reciting the prayer, Father Andreas suddenly stopped. Jean looked up, confused. Father Andreas stared into the chalice of water. His face turned pale. Something had clearly unsettled him. Around the rim of the chalice, black mist had begun to swirl. Without the warriors, the entire camp was silent. Then, a thick fog began to fill the space, slowly creeping in and clouding everything around them. A woman wandered barefoot through the snow, calling out for her child. Her voice echoed eerily in the quiet. The terrifying woman kept searching, haunting and relentless. Meanwhile, back on the ice, chaos had erupted. The dead rose like nightmares from beneath. Goethe screamed for his captain, frozen in fear. One of the zombies lunged. Vlad quickly slashed it to protect Goethe. He took a deep breath and steadied himself. More zombies rushed toward them. Vlad's movement sharpened, swift, calculated. He cut through the undead. Their limbs and heads landed near Goethe, who cried out in terror, completely shaken. Vlad shouted at him to get up and grab a spear. Goethe panicked and screamed that he couldn't. Our MC felt frustrated and cursed silently. The voice in Vlad's head urged him to stay calm. It instructed him to choose a direction and focus if he wanted to escape. Vlad scanned the surroundings, but going forward was impossible. He thought about Jager. Was he okay? Jager was battling with absolute control. His sword danced through the air, cutting down zombies with each stroke. The Great Knight didn't lose his composure, even with the overwhelming amount of monsters. Some mercenaries were taken down. Jager was frustrated. He thought to himself that there was no end to this. He knew the enemy had planned it well. The target was clear. Then, his covered eye started to glow. He decided that there was no time to hesitate. A group of zombies swarmed him, but Jager didn't flinch. The zombies growled at him, ready to attack. With one strong stance, he cut through them all, never even taking a step. The mercenaries were in awe. Their morale rose. With Sir Jaeger fighting alongside them, they still had hope. Holding his combat stance, Jaeger shouted, "Vlad of Sawara, fulfill your contract." Even while fending off a zombie, Vlad heard him clearly. He called back, asking what to do. Jaeger gave the command, retreat to the post and hold the line no matter what. He reminded him of the mission, protect Joseph. Vlad understood. He turned and ran, calling for Goethe to follow him. Goethe shouted, begging him to wait. In his heart, Jaeger prayed that those who followed his command would reach Joseph in time. Few moments later, a man steps forward. The night was busy with the other zombies when something caught his attention. It was another zombie. Jaeger readied himself until he saw its face. Then he whispered, "Sorry I'm late." It was Roderick, now undead. At camp, everything was calm. Joseph sat comfortably, reading his book. Then, screaming. The screams grew louder. He looked up, alarmed. Suddenly, someone burst into the tent. It was a knight named Vordan, out of breath. Joseph asked what was going on. Vordan hesitated. He couldn't speak because the nightmare had just begun. Joseph grew furious when he realized Vordan came straight to him without even assessing the situation first. Vordan explained it was because Joseph's safety was his top priority. Joseph snapped, demanding to know why. If that were true, Vordan hadn't even bothered to bring a sword. Vordan was stunned, only then noticing that his waist was bare. Joseph told him he was lucky. If it had been up to him, he'd have Vordan hanged on the spot. The knight dropped to his knees and begged for forgiveness. Just then, Father Andreas entered the tent with Jean and a few more warriors. They all greeted him as the mighty Joseph. Joseph was about to ask what was happening, but the priest interrupted him. "It is evil," he said, holding out a Bible. He added that it was a Bible written in holy ink. Joseph's eyes widened. The letters on the page quivered as though caught in a storm. He could feel it. This wasn't an ordinary object. He asked if there was a way to stop whatever was coming. Father Andreas replied he wasn't an exorcist, but would try to release as much divine power as he could. Still, he admitted it might not be enough. This evil was far too great. Joseph knew none of the remaining knights had achieved world creation. That left them with only 3 people who could possibly handle this. With no time to waste, Joseph led the way out. But as soon as he stepped out of the tent, he froze. A thick fog blanketed the camp. Within it, men were screaming, writhing in pain, crying out that they weren't the child. Joseph immediately covered his nose. Father Andreas did the same with his arm. Joseph asked if the fog made people delirious. The priest answered that all he knew was, it wasn't natural. Then Joseph felt it. The fog was starting to affect him too. And then, they heard her. A woman's voice echoing through the mist. She was calling for her child. She stepped through the fog barefoot, her voice distant and unsettling. Everyone who saw her froze. Their eyes widened, jaws dropped, and faces turned pale. Joseph held his breath. The barefoot woman stepped closer, her movements slow and eerie. There she was, calling out to her child. She paused, turned toward Joseph, and locked eyes with him. Then she spoke. "There you are. I finally found you." She was referring to Joseph. The woman's hand reached out, glowing with an eerie light. She claimed Joseph as her child. Father Andreas continued praying, his voice unwavering. Jean prayed too, though he winced in pain, struggling to keep going. Golden light formed around them, runes glowing with ancient letters, shielding them from the ghost. Joseph realized that their protection relied solely on this light. He thought to himself, if this barrier failed, only Jaeger could possibly stop her. Cade and Maxim weren't strong enough to handle something like this. The woman pressed her hand against the barrier, trying to break through. Joseph felt a sharp chill in his chest. This curse was personal. Someone had sent this ghost to him. Furious, he wondered who it could be. Jean already coughed up blood. Father Andreas tried to comfort him, promising that the light would return and the sun would come. But the woman's hand cracked through the barrier. Jean looked drained, but he pushed harder. Light burst forward. The ghost screamed in agony while the barrier started closing again. Joseph could tell. The priest was nearly spent. He knew the hymns would end soon. He wondered if this would be the end. The night had only begun, and morning felt impossibly far away. Waiting for the sun felt like hoping for a miracle that might never come. Then something caught his attention. He saw someone running toward them through the mist. The ghost turned, too. It was Vlad. The voice in his head told him the ghost was born of a curse. Ordinary weapons surely wouldn't work. Our MC asked what he should do. The voice asked if he could use aura. Vlad answered, "Are you kidding me?" The voice then mentioned there was one more option. He could borrow Vlad's body. Vlad blinked, unsure if he heard that right. The voice repeated its request, asking to borrow his body. Vlad asked if that was even possible. The voice said that as far as he could remember, he could use aura, but he was not sure if he could manifest it through Vlad's body, and even if it worked, Vlad wouldn't be able to move for a while afterward. So, it wasn't a good idea, the voice admitted. Vlad growled that if he didn't do something, he'd die anyway. The voice replied simply, "This is the way of the sword." Vlad told the voice they should go for it. The voice asked if he was really sure. Our MC he had made a promise to Joseph. It wasn't loyalty driving him anymore. It was faith. The voice then acknowledged Vlad's resolve. Vlad immediately charged at the ghost woman. She let out a piercing scream. Pain shot through Vlad's body. The voice instructed him to close his right eye. Lightning flashed. Vlad was pulled into the world of voices. When he opened his eye again, his sword crackled with lightning. A strong wind blew in the ghost's face. Vlad's eyes turned blue. He swung his blade. It hit her left shoulder. Father Andreas, Jean, and Vordan stood frozen in disbelief. Even Joseph was stunned. Vlad looked calm as his eyes glowed blue. But then, he collapsed to his knees, howling in pain. Electric current flowed through his body. Joseph rushed to him, alarmed. Vlad's body trembled violently. Joseph had no clue how he did it, but what he saw were traces of aura. And Vlad had paid the price. The ghost woman kept crawling, still calling for her child. She was only inches away from Vlad. Joseph ordered Father Andreas to continue the hymns as he ran to help. He pulled Vlad up. The woman reached out and grabbed Vlad's foot. Joseph froze. He was a fucking weakling. He wasn't even capable of getting out of there. Then someone yanked him back by the collar. It was Vordan. He immediately apologized for the discourtesy. Then, threw both Joseph and Vlad behind him. The ghost reached for the knight. Then it shrieked. The two landed near Father Andreas. Joseph, still catching his breath, admitted. This was the first time he was glad to have Vordan around. Vordan simply thanked him for recognizing him. Vlad groaned. He asked Father Andreas to bless his sword. They have to send the woman off. The priest agreed. He cut his palm and used the blood to bless the weapon. It was a strong, genuine blessing. Vlad thanked him, then turned to face the ghost. He stood tall right in front of her. She begged him to find her child. Our MC felt a weight in his chest. Just moments ago, he saw flashes of her past. Women locked away. Children lying on cold floors. She had watched her child freeze to death. The ghost was still crying for her child. Vlad wished her to find peace. The woman begged one last time for her child. But our MC drove the sword through her. After that, her eyes softened. She looked more human. And in her final moment, she still thought of her child. A room was thick with pink, ominous mist. A magician manipulated a swirl of dark smoke. He grinned and let it scatter. But suddenly, the smoke vanished. The abrupt halt of his dark energy caught him off guard. Someone had stopped it. But who, he wondered. As far as he knew, no knight alive could wield aura. Then, someone found him. It was Jaeger. He had hunted down the rat behind the puppet strings. The magician was stunned. The next day, the sun was out, bright and calm. Joseph asked if the magician was the one who controlled death from the shadows. Jaeger returned with the magician's severed head and a small wooden box. Joseph assumed it was the cursed object the ghost woman had been looking for. Jaeger confirmed it had become the child's coffin. Joseph ordered Jaeger to give it to the priest for examination once they returned to Varna. He declared that the expedition was a failure. Jaeger admitted he was ashamed of the outcome. Joseph, however, smiled faintly. Even if it failed, he said, they would return with light steps. He asked Joseph if Vlad had been of any use. The Byzede Lord responded with certainty. He had found him, the one he believed was destined to take his place as the sword, a swordsman who would shine brighter than anyone. Vlad, meanwhile, looked ragged and dazed. He was shocked to learn he'd been unconscious for 3 days. The voice in his head told him to be more cautious next time. Even it hadn't anticipated such a harsh recoil. Vlad muttered that at least it was over. He figured they'd packed up and returned already. The voice informed him they waited for his recovery. It added that Yosef seemed to care more than expected. Vlad stepped out of his tent. What greeted him was an empty camp. Of course, it made sense to him. After everything that happened, who wouldn't have run? A few moments later, Goda spotted him and rushed over. He was genuinely happy to see Vlad awake. Vlad smirked, teasing how the guy who had planned to flee ended up staying the longest. Goda puffed his chest and said he only stayed because they were promised a raise if they stuck around until the team returned. Goda shared how he brought Vlad back to camp, even when Vlad couldn't ride a horse and had gone back into danger for the Lord Knight. He told Vlad to make him look good later. Vlad replied flatly that he'd try. Goda then said Jaeger wanted our MC to report to him once he woke up. He added that Yosef was at the barracks, so Vlad should head there right away. Vlad praised him for doing a good job. Goda reminded him to mention all his good deeds. Vlad was already annoyed and wished he'd just shut up. Inside the tent, as he poured wine into a cup, Yosef asked Vlad if he could drink. Vlad said yes, since he used to work at a brothel bar, but he admitted he never had anything fancy. The Lord Knight told him what he was holding was a nobleman's drink. He thanked Vlad, putting emphasis on the fact that he could have just run away. Our MC reminded him that they had a contract. Joseph recalled how Vlad promised faith instead of loyalty. He thought the contract was just words, but Vlad kept it. And with that, Vlad became someone he couldn't afford to lose. Actually, he thought, someone he must have. Joseph then told him it was time to fulfill his part in the contract. He would reward Vlad based on his accomplishments, so he formally invited Vlad to join the house of Bayezid. Our MC was stunned. Few days later, at the county of Bayezid, Varna, Jaeger told Joseph that the mercenaries had been dismissed. Joseph praised them and said the expedition report was still pending, so they'd need to stay another day or two. Vlad looked around, clearly distracted. Jaeger noticed and asked if it was his first time there. Our MC answered that anywhere he went would be his first time. The knight teased him for being a country bumpkin. Joseph then gave Vlad the day off to look around the city. Blondie immediately thanked him. Jaeger warned him not to get lost and told him to be at City Hall by nightfall. Vlad started getting annoyed. Why does he always treat him like some lost kid? The voice commented that Jaeger liked him, maybe just as much as Joseph did. Vlad sarcastically replied that if Jaeger liked him anymore, he might as well come for his life. Still, he didn't dwell on it. He had a fat paycheck from the expedition and planned to enjoy a greasy meal for the first time in a while. He wondered what was good around the area. Then someone called him and tugged his arm. It was Jean. Vlad asked what was up. Jean said that if Vlad didn't have any plans, the priest wanted to see him. The priest? Vlad asked. They went to a church. Our MC was stunned. It was huge. Even Soara's churches weren't that big. Jean explained that while Sturma was the capital of Bayezid, Varna was the religious center. He told Vlad to wait inside while he fetched the priest. Our MC then entered. He was in awe of what he was seeing. The altar was beautiful and finely detailed. He realized that even though people called him the praying Riemann, he hadn't said a real prayer even once. He scratched her head because somehow that felt like he was committing a sin. Not long after, Father Andreas arrived and apologized for the wait. Vlad thanked him for the invite. The priest smiled and said it was nothing. Then he gave Vlad something, his ID token. Father Andreas figured Joseph could have gotten it done, but church-issued IDs were more effective. After all, the Lord's favor covered the whole continent, he added. Vlad was surprised. The guarantor listed was Father Andreas himself. The priest told him to come to him whenever he needed help. He happily said that from that moment on, he'd be Vlad's guarantor. Our MC was speechless. A boy from the slums without even a proper record of birth now had a sincere guarantor. Without hesitation, our MC knelt before him. He was no longer Vlad from the back alleys. He now became Vlad of Swara. While they were traveling, Joseph explained to Vlad that Bayezid County had 12 towns and 3 cities. There was Swara, the distribution hub, Varna, the religious center, and where they were now, the capital city, Sturma. They were riding in a carriage as they prepared to enter its gates. Inside the mansion, Jaeger reminded Vlad that he was now a guest of Joseph's. He warned him that any stupid mistake could damage Joseph's reputation. He told him not to run around like some hillbilly and just stay put. Vlad replied with a quick, "Yes, sir." Jaeger added that the maids would bring refreshments soon. He seemed like he was about to say more, but suddenly stopped. That puzzled Vlad. Jaeger told them it was nothing and just advised them not to eat anything. He warned that if they gobbled up food like barbarians, rumors might start. Vlad muttered that eating just a little wouldn't hurt. Jaeger snapped at him to shut up and not eat anything at all. They soon entered the room. Goethe was clearly amazed. "Is this the parlor?" he asked. Then he added, "Bayezid's the real deal, huh?" Vlad nodded in agreement. Just then, someone arrived. A man stepped out from behind a curtain and admitted he'd been trying to be sneaky in there. He walked over to them. Right away, Vlad sensed something unusual about the guy. Then the man asked who they were. Vlad felt a bit tense. The guy resembled Joseph, but his aura was on a whole different level. Our MC thought he looked like someone who could kill with just a stare. Goethe introduced himself politely, and the man acknowledged. Then he turned to Vlad. Vlad introduced himself as Vlad from Sawara. The man said it was his first time hearing that name, but something about Vlad's fierce gaze caught his interest. He noticed that Vlad didn't flinch or look intimidated. He liked what he saw and admitted that Joseph might have struck gold. Vlad really did seem promising. Then he pulled something out of his pocket, a handful of peanuts. He offered them some. Vlad looked at the snack, then politely declined. "We were told not to eat," he explained. The man looked puzzled. Vlad repeated, "We were told not to eat anything here." Goethe stared at Vlad, thinking he was nuts for refusing an offer from someone obviously important. The man was surely embarrassed, and just like that, Vlad of Sawara's first act in the house of Bayezid was refusing peanuts from Rudiger, the Count's eldest son. Rudiger popped one into his mouth and said, "They're really good, though." Meanwhile, someone was writing something down when a man brought up Vlad. That man was Joseph's father, the Count. The Count said they hadn't seen anyone special since Jaeger, whom Joseph's mother had recruited. He told Joseph that if he could raise Vlad into a knight as skilled as their family's best, he'd reward him. Joseph thanked him. With a firm tone, the Count reminded Joseph that swordsmanship might not be his strength, but he should never forget that he was part of Bayezid. Joseph acknowledged it. Then the Count asked if he was feeling better. Joseph replied, "Yes, sir." With that, the Count told him he could go. Joseph wished him a good rest, and immediately left the room. The Count watched him closely as he left. He noticed Joseph was limping. He told his attendant they should give him more medicine. The old man agreed, adding that both Joseph and Mrs. Oksana would appreciate it. The Count remarked that the Madame was very attentive when it came to her son. Then he asked the old man, Ragmus, what he thought of Joseph's report. Ragmus said it should be taken seriously, especially with all the strange events happening lately. The Count was furious that someone would dare commit such evil in his lands. Ragmus added that the reports from Varna mentioned a dangerous combination of resurrection magic and curses. He said it might be the work of either a powerful dark mage or more than one. The Count replied that if there were multiple mages, they might be dealing with an organized group. Ragmus couldn't agree more, but the Count declared that it shouldn't change anything. The House of Bayezid would remain unshaken, and they'd crush anyone who threatened them. He told Ragmus to find them, the ones who endangered his son and brought chaos into his domain. Later that evening, Joseph entered the parlor and apologized for the delay. He asked if they'd been waiting long. Goethe answered politely, "Not at all, sir." Joseph recognized him. The Lord Knight told him they'd discuss his reward tomorrow. For now, the maid would guide him to his room where he could rest. Goethe tried to hide his disappointment. He'd been starving all day, waiting for that reward. He then stated he'd take his leave. Now alone with Vlad, Joseph turned his attention to him. He acknowledged that Vlad had saved his life and declared his intent to dedicate his sword to him in the future. He asked if that was true. Vlad confirmed it. Joseph then brought up what Vlad had mentioned earlier, about having a mission to fulfill. Joseph interpreted that as Vlad's desire for freedom and asked if he was right. Vlad answered yes. Joseph pointed out the contradiction, devoting his sword to someone while seeking freedom. He wanted clarity. He asked Vlad directly, what exactly did he plan to do with that freedom? If Vlad could answer that, Joseph would know precisely what to give him. Vlad turned serious. Watching, Joseph calmly seated beneath the moonlight. He had a question of his own. He brought up the knight who resembles blue moonlight and asked, Did Joseph know Godin of Gaidar? Joseph initially thought Vlad was just another useful recruit, nothing more. But learning about his past and his goal shifted everything. The name Godin of Gaidar was enough to stir Joseph. He asked for confirmation. Was he the man who destroyed Rose's smile? Vlad answered yes. He had never forgotten that name. Not for a moment. Godin was the man who murdered his savior, the man who shattered the world Vlad once believed in. And oddly enough, someone he couldn't help but admire. Joseph fell silent for a beat. Then with refreshing honesty, he admitted he couldn't help Vlad with that. Godin was far beyond his reach. Vlad wasn't surprised. After all, Joseph was still just the Count's son, but he appreciated the honesty. Then Joseph made a proposal, a change in their agreement, a formal 7-year contract. Vlad blinked, confused. Joseph explained that he had swallowed his noble pride to do this. It was no small gesture. Jaeger, standing off to the side, was glaring holes through Vlad, clearly aware this was unprecedented. Joseph laid out the terms. For saving him, Vlad would be rewarded with the chance at a brilliant future. Joseph would house, feed, and train him, transforming him into a knight who could stand tall anywhere. That word, knight, sparked something in Vlad. In return, Joseph expected loyalty, obedience. But when it came to Godin, Vlad was on his own. However, for matters related to Sawara's back alleys, Joseph would give him freedom to act. He mentioned something that caught Vlad off guard, the girl Zamina. She was now in a covenant. Joseph then challenged him. What could Vlad really accomplish alone, with only a sword? He reminded him, swords aren't the only sharp weapons in the world. So he asked him again, what will you do, Vlad? After the conversation, Joseph mused aloud. Vlad was aiming high. Jaeger, watching from nearby, finally spoke. Was it really worth going so far for just one kid? The knight argued that he could find as many useful kids as he wished. Joseph admitted he could always find more young talents, but finding one who blooms, that was another matter. Jaeger asked if Joseph truly believed Vlad would meet his expectations. Joseph paused and answered firmly, absolutely. He had seen it with his own eyes. Still, Jaeger warned that Vlad was rebellious, unpredictable. Handling him would be a pain. Joseph smiled. That's why I have you. He believed that 7 years was plenty of time to train, temper, and tame Vlad. The harder the struggle, the more brilliant the outcome. Joseph thought Vlad was just a useful wolf, but now, he saw him as a wolf chasing the moon. The next day, Jaeger brought Vlad to his new room and he immediately appreciated it. It had a bed, a clean floor. It felt like a palace compared to the alleys of Sawara. Jaeger blinked, caught off guard. He had nearly forgotten Vlad's background. Most who serve lords come from proper families. Vlad wasn't one of those. Still, he thought Vlad would do fine, as long as he didn't mess up. Vlad mentioned his concern about rejecting Retigier's peanuts. Jaeger just shook his head. Of course he'd bring that up. You don't listen anyway, he muttered. He then told Vlad to eat and head to the training grounds afterward. They'd spar twice a day, just like on the expedition. Then Jaeger's eyes shifted. Someone was approaching. He whispered, "That's Lady Oksana." Joseph's mother. Show her the respect you've learned. Vlad and Jaeger bowed as Lady Oksana approached, graceful and commanding. She asked softly if that was the child. Jaeger nodded and confirmed that Joseph brought him in personally. She looked Vlad over and simply said she understood. Vlad stole a quick glance at her, just enough to catch her smiling. His face turned red. Oksana thanked him for saving her son. Vlad responded humbly, saying he was only fulfilling his duty. But Oksana didn't seem to agree. She said he had done something far greater than he realized, and that deserved a reward. Vlad was about to express his gratitude until she suddenly rubbed his head. Caught off guard, he froze. She admired the color of his hair, saying it matched beautifully with his blue eyes. One hand on her neck, the other on his shoulder, she examined him more closely. She noted that he was skinny, but had broad shoulders, and said he would look wonderful once he filled out a bit. She planned to have an outfit made for him. Vlad stammered a thank you, completely flustered. Oksana gave him one last lingering look, before turning to Jaeger and instructing him to carry on. Jaeger acknowledged her and watched her leave. Once she was gone, Vlad sighed. Jaeger raised an eyebrow, amused that he had this side of him. Vlad admitted he had never really been around women before. Jaeger chuckled and said it wasn't bad for the first time. In his mind, even he found Lady Oksana hard to deal with. He clapped Vlad on the back and told him to come get some food. At the cafeteria, a guy deliberately spit. The worst part? His target was a soup, specifically Vlad's soup. The guy sneered, saying he thought he smelled trash and guessed he was right, that Vlad was the trash can. Laughter erupted from the other boys. Vlad's eyes glowed. Without saying a word, he scooped out the spit and dropped it onto the floor. Then, calmly, he resumed eating. He noted how the bullying had come earlier than expected. The bully grew annoyed at Vlad's lack of reaction, but Vlad remembered Jaeger's words. Everything he does reflects back on Joseph. So, as much as he wanted to retaliate, he needed to be smart about it. The bully turned to leave, frustrated. Then Vlad asked what his name was. The man paused, confused. Vlad repeated the question, his tone sharper. The pressure in Vlad's gaze made the boy falter. "Sovanin," he answered, stuttering. Vlad stood and repeated the name. He said he would remember it, then turned and walked away. The Count was walking outside, flanked by his retainers. He paused and looked to one side of the grounds. There, the knights were in the middle of training. He decided to stop and observe for a while. His gaze sharpened as he watched. The Count then asked if that was the kid. He'd heard it was a blonde boy. He commented that the boy looked quite striking. Ragmus then pointed to another spot. The Count followed his finger. There, hidden in the shadows, was someone else watching in secret. It was Jaeger. He thought to himself how the first bout often had a way of rattling a person. The Count shifted his attention back to the field. He wanted to see how skilled the boy really was. A sword cut through the air. It was Vlad facing off against a knight. He moved fast, confident, and quickly gained the upper hand. The display rattled his opponent. Ragmus observed how aggressive the boy was, especially considering the size difference between him and his opponent. The Count frowned slightly. He thought the boy was a bit rough, maybe even unrefined. But then again, something about him shone through. The boy might be clumsy, yes, but there was something admirable in how he applied everything he had learned. A voice called out instruction, reminding Vlad that all swordsmanship begins with his steps. Footwork matters. Where the feet are placed, the rest follows. And now, if he could deceive the opponent with just his shoulders and his gaze, then he could steer their movements completely. The knight swung his sword. Vlad shifted from left to right in a quick blur. The move threw the knight off, and in the blink of an eye, Vlad was already in his face. A hit landed hard. The knight groaned, confused. He could have sworn Vlad aimed for his left. Vlad grabbed the guy by the hair. He called him out as one of Savanin's lackeys, the same guy who loved laughing back at the cafeteria. He challenged him to laugh again, and then punched him square in the face. The surrounding knights froze. Some were stunned. Others were genuinely terrified. Ragmus asked if it was really okay to let him beat someone up like that in a training match. The Count, without blinking, told him to leave it be. He uttered that to become a knight, a bit of spirit like that was essential. He also noticed someone enjoying the whole thing. Jaeger. And Ragmus couldn't agree more. One knight finally stepped forward to break it up. He shouted for Vlad to stop, then got angry that Vlad hadn't even paused, asking if Vlad thought he was a joke. Vlad's hand was already smeared with blood. He soon let go of the knight and stood tall in front of him. He calmly apologized, saying he got a bit too caught up in it. That gaze alone made the guy freeze. Vlad turned and walked away. Then he spotted Savanin and told him to pass on the apology. He was sorry for going overboard. He explained that once he gets into something, it's hard to snap out of it. Savanin clenched his jaw in anger. Then Vlad gave him an early apology. He said he was apologizing in advance because in Savanin's case, it wouldn't just end like that. He smirked and teased Savanin. If the soup's ever too bland, he might call him over to spit in it again. That's when Savanin realized this guy was nuts. In his mind, Joseph had brought in a mad dog from the back alleys. Later, Gerda told Vlad that word had spread. People were saying he'd been beating up other vassals. Vlad simply ignored the remarks and asked him if being a stable hand was easy work. Goethe answered yes, then boasted that he wasn't just any stable hand. He served the great Count Bayezid. He snapped back into the topic. He warned Vlad that what he did was a crime. Vlad asked why he was acting like that's something new. Had Goethe forgotten that he'd always been a criminal? And honestly, Simple assault was going easy, he added. The warrior turned pale. Vlad added that he hadn't left any visible marks, so it was fine. Besides, they started it, he argued. Gerda still didn't understand how that made it okay. Vlad replied that no one was bothering him now, so it was peaceful. Then Gerda noticed someone approaching. A chubby guy introduced himself as Portly Canner. Vlad looked at him and asked what business he had. Portly hesitated. Vlad told him to either sit down or get lost. No use standing around like that. Portly lit up. He was genuinely happy that someone asked him to sit. But deep down, Vlad just wanted him to go away. Portly shared that he usually ate alone, in weird places, like bathrooms. Vlad said he was eating and holding something precious, a sausage. Portly knew exactly which one. His father was the supplier, he added. The Canners had been in cattle and livestock farming for generations. Portly said he saw Vlad asking for more sausages earlier. He then offered his own stash. Vlad squinted, suspicious. He asked what this guy was playing at. There was clear hostility. Moments later, they entered a room with an enormous amount of sausages hanging from the ceiling. He explained that his father had sent them, but there was no way he could finish them alone. Vlad thought about it. These vassals, young masters from great houses, were the type of people he never would have spoken to back in the alleys. Now that he could, it might be wise to make at least one connection. He invited Portly to eat with him from then on. Gerda's eyes sparkled at the sight of all that meat. Portly was overjoyed. He asked if Vlad really meant it. Vlad nodded. They were vassals, after all. They should get along. But just to clarify, it definitely wasn't for the sausages. Few days later, someone was walking in the hallway. It was Yager. He was thinking how serving Joseph and raising a whole human being wasn't an ordinary task. He knew he'd only catch his breath once Cade and Maxim recovered. Someone called out to him, asking where he was off to in such a hurry. It was Sir Gregory. Jaeger greeted him and cursed in his head. He may not like the presence of this man. Gregory laughed, amused that Jaeger was so obvious with his irritation. Jaeger argued that he was busy at the moment. Gregory wasn't surprised. He expected him to be buried in Joseph's responsibilities. Jaeger asked if he had something to say. Gregory brought up vassals, saying someone like Jaeger should be raising one. He added that he thinks it's not too late yet. The knight suggested for Gregory to focus on his own vassal. It puzzled him why Gregory was bringing this up. Gregory proudly mentioned his dear Portly, saying the boy's all grown up and needs to lose some weight. Jaeger asked what his point was. Gregory shared his thoughts on Vlad, saying he seemed like a good kid, especially his boldness. Jaeger reminded him once more that he was busy and told him to cut to the chase. Gregory pressed on, warning that knights meddling in vassals' affairs might be seen as embarrassing. He noted how Vlad was warming up to Portly lately. Jaeger pointed out that Vlad had no friends because he thought he was better than everyone else. Gregory requested Jaeger to tell Vlad to stick with Portly. As it turned out, Portly was his cousin's nephew, and he didn't want him getting roughed up. Plus, asking anyone else was pointless. Jaeger asked if he was supposed to do that for free. Gregory offered a future favor in return. The knight replied that Vlad never really listened to him, but Gregory just shrugged and said the kid seemed like he was going places. Jaeger replied again, reiterating that Vlad never really listened to him. Gregory just laughed and repeated, "Yep, that kid's definitely going places." Meanwhile, Gerda shared that, in his opinion, Vlad wasn't the problem. He just couldn't get on a horse. He explained that the horses were well trained, not the kind to spook, but when Vlad approached them, they'd panic and bolt. He added that it might have nothing to do with skill at all. Even the other stable hands thought it was odd. Vlad cursed. That's how it always was. Dogs, cats, all animals hated him. Now it was horses too. Then he remembered. He rode Jager's horse that night when they fled from the undead. Gerda noted that Jager's horse was a really expensive one. Vlad figured he couldn't just say he could only ride elite horses. Jager insisted that he must learn to ride no matter what. A lady then approached and informed them that Lady Oksana had summoned Vlad. Vlad had to confirm if what he was hearing was right. Inside the elegant room, Oksana remarked that no one would have guessed he came from the back alleys. She said the clothes suited him. Our MC, for the first time in his life, was now dressed in a tailored suit. She instructed the tailor not to make them too fitted since Vlad was just 17 and still growing. She remembered how much Joseph had grown at that age. Lady Oksana then told Vlad she'd get him new clothes when summer came. She added that clothes that matched the season were essential for maintaining performance. Vlad blushed and thanked her. Lady Oksana reiterated that she should be thanking him for saving her son. She then apologized for taking up his time while training and told him he could leave. Vlad thanked her again. He left the room, new clothes on, old ones draped on his arm. Vlad sighed. Oksana was tough to handle. He wondered how much the clothes were worth. They felt so comfortable. He couldn't believe they were his. But then he thought, the old ones didn't feel like his either. He couldn't get used to it. He had fought so hard to enter the Bayezid family and still didn't feel like he belonged. It felt like gaining weight, like flesh clinging to a soul. When he peeked out the window, he saw a group of vassals gathered. Someone was getting beaten. Savanin was punching the kid and calling him a pig. He sneered that letting him live quietly was clearly a mistake. It was portly, and he was helplessly on the ground. Savanin mocked his friendship with Vlad, calling them filthy losers. Vlad could see everything. Then a thought crossed his mind. Wherever he went, people were all the same. Some had the time of their lives, and some were barely surviving. In the end, there would be bullies preying on the weak. Vlad turned and walked away. He decided he'd wear the fancy clothes for that day. The night came. There was a knock at the door. From inside, someone asked who it was. Vlad answered. It was him. He was back in his old clothes. Portly opened the door, and Vlad's brows drew together when he saw him. Portly's face was covered in bruises. He asked why Vlad had come at that hour. Our MC replied that he needed something from him. He pointed at something inside and asked for it. He was talking about the Jaman. Portly hesitated, asking if Vlad was seriously taking it for free. He actually cherished that piece. Our MC calmly replied, yes. Portly looked dejected. In his head, even if they weren't friends, he'd hoped Vlad would at least smile when they crossed paths. Now it just felt like Vlad saw him as someone to use, but still, he thought. Portly decided it was better than eating alone. He then handed over the Jaman. Vlad told him not to think it was unfair. He was only taking what was rightfully his. Portly looked confused. Vlad added that it was something a knight once told him. A knight only takes the price he's earned. Our MC was now in front of a group of vassals. It was 14 against 1. He muttered that not even back-alley thugs went this far. Savanin snarled at him to shut up and mocked how long he thought he could keep that confidence. Vlad taunted him to step forward, saying he came all this way quietly for him. They should do the same. Sovanin snapped, ordering the others to crush him. Vlad smirked. He was glad he'd changed. He was sure that tonight, blood was going to splatter. Several vassals were already injured. One at the front got punched clean in the face. A voice from the group barked orders, not to fall back, even if Vlad had broken through their formation. They tried surrounding him again. Sovanin realized something. This Vlad wasn't the same as the one who sparred with them before. It didn't make sense. Just 2 months ago, the guy could barely hold a sword. Still, Sovanin shouted for everyone to hold the line. He threatened them. If anyone backed off, he'd be the one to kill them. But Vlad had already locked on. He fixed his glare on Savanin. He challenged him. How dare he say that? Had he ever even tried to kill someone before? Savanin snapped, called him a lunatic, and demanded to know what he was yapping about. Then he swung. Our MC then thought, during the expedition, Vlad had poured everything into every single blow. Now, when Savanin tried to block him, the voice inside Vlad encouraged him more, claiming that Jaeger's training was paying off. He should just keep trapping the opponent with the gap he was creating, the voice added. Savanin winced. The speed caught him off guard. Vlad was reading him like a book and was able to land another hit. Our MC finally understood the teachings. His gap was his space. He kept charging and charging. Then, in a blur, Savanin slipped and fell. He gritted through the pain, teary-eyed. And Vlad loomed over him. A sword aimed straight for his face. The bully just lay there, bracing himself for whatever was about to come. Vlad couldn't be stopped now. Savanin let out a scream. His men were all stunned and had zero idea what to do next. But the blade stopped, just an inch away from his temple. Savanin trembled in fear. Vlad warned him not to look him in the eye again and told him not to mess with the fatty either. Savanin froze. He felt it. Vlad really meant to kill him. Vlad stood up and declared the score settled. He's relieved that he already paid for the Jaman. He looked at the rest and asked who was next. He added that they've got to finish what they started. Nobody moved. Vlad cracked his neck. If they weren't coming to him, he'd come to them. The vassals trembled. Blood soon splattered across the courtyard under the moonlight. From a window, a silhouette watched. It was the Count. He quietly thought Vlad was outstanding. At the monthly Knights meeting, a subtle divide had formed. On one side were Rudiger's supporters. Opposite them stood those backing Joseph. In the middle were the knights like Gregory, neutral and amused. The Count sat at the head, observing it all. At the foot of the staircase stood Captain Antalis. He reported the updated duty roster to cover for Rudiger and the knights being sent on a mission. The Count observed closely as the captain moved on to the next agenda, the distribution of holy items from the church. He noticed that the room's mood shifted. Rudiger's supporters looked like they were ready to snap. Joseph's side, meanwhile, looked relaxed. He knew it was something to be happy about since Joseph's camp had been disheartened for a while. Yager then noticed the Count. To his surprise, the old man was smiling. He questioned if it was really happening. The meeting wrapped up. Knights were reminded to check their assignments before leaving. Yager and his men stepped out of the room. Then a knight from Rudiger's camp spat bitterly, claiming that Yager brought in a kid who didn't even know who he shouldn't bite, saying this is exactly what happens when someone with no background gets dragged in. Yager turned. Their glares were sharp. Another knight clicked his tongue and told the others to let it go. There was no point fighting someone they now knew was Yager's vassal. Gregory, watching from the side, laughed. He said the others were boiling. Yager asked what he meant. Gregory grinned, knowing Yager understood everything. He questioned why the knight was still pretending not to, especially when everyone was already talking. He shared what he'd heard. Vlad supposedly pulled off a major exorcism. Even the drill instructor admitted he couldn't handle him, saying Vlad was beyond the standard. Yager remained nonchalant. Our MC was surely a pain in the ass. Gregory thanked him, saying he'd keep his promise and he could be taken by Yager along for a task. No complaints, even if it's exhausting or tough. Yager simply replied that he'd keep that in mind. Internally, Yager admitted he was proud, but it didn't surprise him. He trained the kid after all. That kind of result was expected. An armor was on display. Joseph told Yager and Vordan that it was a gift from his father, meant for Vlad. The knight couldn't believe that it came from the Count himself. Vordan remarked that it was far too nice for a mere vassal. Yager noted the material. It was orc leather. Grey orc, no less. Joseph confirmed it. Grey orcs are native only to the north, so armor made from their leather carries the title Northern Warrior. Joseph figured his father must really like the boy. And Vlad had proven he was worth investing in, earning the Count's approval in just a month. Yager agreed, saying there wasn't a single vassal who could rival him right now. Joseph said he'd heard the same. Rumors had already spread. He added that they couldn't afford to stay idle. Then he produced an envelope. Yager asked what it was. Joseph replied it was their next move. After reading the letter, Yager noted that it wasn't just any invitation. Joseph then asked if Yager could be the one to respond. The knight immediately agreed. He added that he'd been feeling cooped up lately, always cleaning up after the kid, so he didn't mind at all. And just like that, it was decided. They were heading to Dermar. Under the bright, clear sky, a carriage rolled steadily along the road. Inside, Vlad sat across from Joseph, who spoke casually. He told Vlad that Dermar is known for its lemons, one of the few fruits northerners get to enjoy, so it's something to be grateful for. More importantly, Dermar is a gateway to the central regions, which makes it a valuable asset for those in the north. Vlad asked if that's the reason Yager was getting involved. Joseph confirmed it. In their world, every crisis is also an opportunity, especially if it's not your own. He explained that the Heinel family was currently locked in a messy succession dispute, and a personal invitation from the rightful heir was essentially a cry for help. Vlad muttered that noble politics were messy. Joseph replied that, in the end, it all boiled down to fighting over land. Daramar's land, in this case. Vlad pointed out that what made it worse was that this fight was between family members, ones who shared the same blood. Joseph shrugged. In nobility, blood feuds were practically a tradition. The rightful heir to the Heinel family was a young woman named Alicia. Her uncle, Andra Heinel, contested her claim, alleging she was born from an illegitimate affair. If she were to disappear, Andre would become Baron without challenge. Alicia was the only child of the late Baron Heinel, but her position was fragile. simply because she was a woman. Left with little support, her only path forward was to prove her legitimacy through an honorable duel sanctioned by the church. Joseph then reflected on his own relation to the matter. He was connected to Alicia through his maternal bloodline, technically her 8th cousin. A distant relation, but just close enough to offer aid under the name of kinship. Joseph explained to Vlad that their real aim was to make the Heinal family owe them a favor, and it was a plan his father fully supported. Through the carriage window, Vlad caught sight of Jaeger riding alongside them. He couldn't help but admire him. It was rare for a knight to be invited by the head of a noble house to defend their honor. That alone said a lot. Jaeger noticed Vlad staring and snapped, asking what that insolent look in his eyes was supposed to mean. Vlad pouted and said he hadn't even said anything. Jaeger scolded him for lounging comfortably inside the carriage while the knight he served had to ride a horse. Our MC admitted he didn't really have a defense for that. Jaeger, clearly irritated, said he had finally been able to walk around proudly ever since Vlad had crushed the other vassals. But the fact that Vlad still couldn't ride a horse ruined the whole image. He grumbled that he couldn't believe he was stuck training such a fool. Vlad replied that maybe he could ride an expensive horse. Probably. Jaeger exploded, saying that if anyone should ride an expensive horse, it should be him. After all, he was the one with the nobler pedigree. Vlad then noticed something strange happening in his body. His heart had been racing a lot these days, and he wondered if it was because of the constant stress and nagging. But then again, it made sense. Joseph kept talking non-stop in front of him, and Jaeger nagged relentlessly beside him. Then something happened. The ground began to shake. Vlad thought it was an earthquake. Vordan called out, pointing out the trembling earth. The rumbling didn't stop. Jaeger ordered everyone to halt and to get off their horses. The knights obeyed immediately. Vlad kicked the carriage door open, rushed over to Joseph, and helped him out. He instructed him to duck and even guided his head down. Joseph was taken aback. He told Vlad that his earnestness was admirable, but also told him not to panic too much. Our MC blinked in confusion. Not long after, the shaking had stopped. Vlad muttered that it was his first time experiencing an earthquake. Joseph corrected him. It wasn't an earthquake. He told Vlad to look at the ground. There were massive tracks carved into the dirt. It was the trail of a giant death worm, an ancient creature said to be a remnant of a fallen dragon. Vlad's eyes widened at the explanation. And then, he smiled. He thought it sounded awesome. Later, at Darimar, the sole city of the Heinal family, the carriage finally rolled up to the entrance. Joseph turned to Vlad and told him that from this point onward, he was free to move around. Vlad was caught off guard and asked if that meant he was going alone. Joseph replied that he could bring Goethe with him if he wanted. He encouraged Vlad to explore and observe as much as he could while he had the chance. It surprised Vlad that he had this much freedom. Joseph asked if he wasn't satisfied. Vlad replied that he actually loved the idea, but Joseph interrupted, reminding him to think about why he'd brought them along in the first place. He explained that an honorable duel was a rare sight, not to mention that this time it was a team event. More importantly, knights from various backgrounds had gathered in Darimar. Joseph told Vlad to observe the knights and learn from them, to figure out what he truly needed to understand. He believed that showing something once was more valuable than explaining it 10 times. Since he planned to foster Vlad properly, he hoped this trip would help expand the boy's worldview through direct experiences. Jaeger, as expected, couldn't help but nag. He told Vlad not to get beaten up in some back alley, and reminded him that they'd still be sparring in the evening. Vlad replied that he wasn't that stupid. Jaeger teased him, saying he had already lost trust in him, especially when the kid still couldn't even ride a horse. He told Vlad to report back to him later that evening, and if anything suspicious happened, to inform him without delay. Our MC immediately agreed. Finally, after what felt like ages, Vlad had a moment of freedom. He decided to look around. Compared to the Bayezid mansion, Darimar felt smaller and a bit worn down. The place looked old, and Vlad wondered if they didn't bother with upkeep. For a city famous for lemons, it didn't look like they had much wealth. That's when his sword pulsated. The voice inside it stirred. It recalled having once been in that very place. The memory of a tree on a hill came flooding back. Vlad figured it was time to pray, something he hadn't done in quite a while. After all, their deal was simple. The sword would lend him its strength, and in return, Vlad would give its memories a place to return to. Since he'd been taking from the voice all this time, he decided that maybe it was time to give something back. The tree stood on a hill in a graveyard. Meanwhile, back inside the mansion, a woman sat upon a modest throne. She thanked Joseph for traveling all the way to Daramar. Joseph bowed and stated that he was more than willing to answer the call in support of the rightful heir. He emphasized that blood ties were still the most sacred bond. He was speaking to Alicia. Joseph added that Count Bized had already approved their participation. All that remained was Alicia's final decision. Alicia gave her answer. She had already made up her mind. It would go as the Count wished. But she laid down one condition. Victory in the duel must be hers. Joseph assured her there was no need to worry. The sword of Bized had never failed to deliver victory. Later, at dusk, as they descended the stairs, Vorden warned them not to underestimate her. Jaeger agreed. He said that Alicia's composure showed the temperament of a true matriarch. She might look fragile at a glance, but she was clearly holding herself together, strong and determined. Joseph acknowledged the point. He'd noticed it too. She had maintained control of the conversation until the very end. But even with that, Joseph remained resolute. Their plan would remain the same. As Vlad stood before a tombstone, he thought to himself, perhaps it's true that in the end, all that remains are memories. Maybe that's why humans cling so tightly to the idea of leaving something behind. He continued, because when you look at those traces, like scars, they bring back the memories of the day they were made. He found himself wishing he could have done something like this for his mother, too. He crouched down and noticed the grave wasn't well cared for. Leaves had gathered over it. Gently, he brushed them away, and quietly muttered that it's only proper to greet the owners of the land. The voice then replied casually that he didn't say anything. Vlad unsheathed the sword. He let the soul take its time, even though he had missed his chance to observe the nights just to be there. The voice thanked him. Vlad pierced the blade into the ground. To anyone else, he might have looked like he was praying. But our MC was onto something else, of course. The soul within the sword stirred. Bits and pieces of memories began to return to it. It recalled the tree, how it used to be smaller. It tried to remember when that was, and with whom it had been here. Then suddenly, the soul sensed something. Something, or someone, was watching them. It recognized him. The soul warned Vlad that there was something ahead that knew who it was. Vlad blinked, confused. The soul asked if it could borrow our MC's body for a moment. Vlad agreed, as long as it would only be brief. He closed his eyes, and the soul merged with him. Vlad's left eye remained open, and with it, he could see much farther than before. Then our MC was in awe as he saw something out of the ordinary. A massive white snake came into view. The soul explained that it was a spirit. Perched atop the tree, the spirit watched them. Another strange thing, Vlad thought. It felt like all he'd been seeing lately were things out of a fever dream. Our MC noted that it was just staring at him, but the voice clarified. It wasn't looking at Vlad. It was watching him, the one residing within. The snake began to move. It slithered down the tree. Vlad tensed, unsure if it would attack. The voice inside assured him it wouldn't bite. Vlad didn't understand how it could know that. Still, as the snake neared, Vlad realized it didn't feel threatening at all. There was warmth in the air. The hill felt like spring. Then a voice spoke from behind him. Someone asked who he was. Vlad was startled, and the snake started fading away. A woman stood behind him with cleaning tools. She asked how he had come to that place, explaining that the place was only allowed for the Heinal family. Vlad quickly bowed and apologized, saying he had been looking for a quiet place to pray and hadn't known. She didn't look entirely convinced, so Vlad pulled out the badge given by Father Andreas and introduced himself as a vassal under Sir Jaeger. She inspected the badge and nodded, confirming he wasn't suspicious. Our MC then thanked her. A silence settled between them, slightly awkward. Vlad realized that standing beside a noble's grave without permission was, in hindsight, disrespectful. And if this woman decided to speak up about it, it could easily cast a shadow on Joseph, and without a doubt, land him in trouble too. He knew he had to defuse the situation quickly, so he immediately offered his help. Pointing out that she must be a maid and was likely there to clean the grave, he added that he'd already cleaned up a little. Some leaves had piled up and he cleared them away. She glanced at the grave, checking his claim. Vlad explained it simply felt right to greet the ones who rest there. He picked up her bucket of cleaning tools and offered to do the work. But then, he asked for a favor. If they could just overlook the matter, he'd really appreciate it. He shared that if Jaeger finds out, he'd be furious. The woman just smiled and told him she'd think about it, depending on how well he cleans. Deep inside, Vlad was annoyed. Pretty ones are always hard to convince, he thought. He scrubbed the grave as the woman giggled. A peaceful breeze blew across the hill. Back at the mansion, the clang of metal rang out. A sword was blocked by a shield. Vlad watched, amazed. It was a duel between knights. The voice commented on the strong form. Vlad asked if he meant Sir Colin. The voice confirmed and added that Colin could even cut the rimbar. Vlad thought the title, Dirty Boar of the Midlands, suited him well, but he found Sir Pablo more impressive. The voice agreed. Pablo's shield technique was refined and precise. To Vlad, it was wild how intense warm-up sparring could be. He asked if you had to be that skilled to become a knight. The voice reminded him that even Sir Vordan was a knight. Vlad realized not all knights are equal. In Swara, he had no idea. But now, in this wider world, he realized his own place. He accepted it. He still had a long way to go. The day of the duel arrived. One was getting strapped into his armor. It was Sir Jaeger, he instructed Vlad to tighten the buckles more. Glancing aside, Vlad saw the man with blue hair. That was Endre Heinel, the one trying to steal his niece's rightful place. Jaeger told Vlad to keep his eyes open. A duel between real knights isn't something you see every day. And, though he didn't know what happened yesterday, Jaeger advised Vlad not to dwell on it. Vlad was caught off guard. Jaeger saw the surprise and pointed out that it was written all over his face. Vlad had watched the sparring and realized how monstrous knightly skill could be. Jaeger told him plainly, a child must walk before they can run. And Vlad? He's still at the walking stage. He added that the higher his aim, the longer his journey would be. Vlad nodded. He understood. Then a commanding voice rang out, telling everyone to pay their respects. The doors opened. The master of Heinel entered. Vlad hadn't seen her before, but he'd heard she was young. Alicia Heinel stepped forward. Vlad froze. She was the maid he'd met at the graveyard. The voice snickered. He should probably add, insulting a noble to his list of crimes. Vlad just thought, damn it. Alicia made her way to the throne. She caught sight of Vlad standing to the side and shot him a glare. As he bowed and greeted the head of house, Vlad could tell. She had recognized him. But just as she passed by, she smiled, like she was teasing him. Then she took her seat. The priest then stepped forward and announced that with both parties now present, the duel would proceed. He declared that the gods who watch over the land shall be their witnesses, and the rising sun their proof. A duel with everything on the line was about to begin. It would be honorable, yet brutal. Noble blood may run a clear blue, but it carries weight, responsibility, duty, and karma far heavier than any warm red. Still, Alicia wasn't ready to let her blood run cold just yet. She suddenly yelled for the duel to stop. Her knight, an old man, was bloodied and barely able to stand. Alicia surrendered, but the old knight refused to yield. The priest addressed him by name, Sir Duncan, and reminded him that his master had thrown a white towel. Therefore, he must admit defeat. His opponent stepped forward, calling him captain, and said it had been a good fight. Duncan asked if the knight really still saw him as his captain. Once, Duncan had called him the future of House Heinel. He hadn't expected that future to return as the sword that would cut down his own master. He thought it was a shame. The priest announced the victor, Sir Chard, Endra's knight. Someone whispered to Endra that it was a great start. Endra looked smug. The next duel began, Jaeger versus Sir Colin. The priest reminded both parties, no aura. The duel ends when a master or their proxy surrenders, or if a serious injury prevents the fight from continuing. Then Jaeger gave Vlad a glance. A message passed through it clearly. Watch closely. To him, Vlad was still a kid trying to run before he could walk. Jaeger tapped under his eye. Vlad blinked, realizing this was a lesson, and today's study material, the warthog of the central region. Sir Colin charged first. Jaeger dodged with ease. Another heavy swing. Jaeger remained calm, stepping aside smoothly. Sir Colin, on the other hand, was giving his all. He was confident he'd win this fight. Sir Colin grew more aggressive. He was a bit faster. and a bit stronger. The Byzede knight was able to dodge again. He slashed again and again, but Sir Jaeger evaded each blow. From the sidelines, Endra praised Colin's overwhelming strength. He thought Jaeger was being driven into a corner. But Sir Pablo watched differently. He didn't agree. He sensed the fight's momentum shifting in a subtle, strange way. He knew Colin must have been feeling it too. Frustration built in Sir Colin. Despite his power, he couldn't touch Jaeger. Jaeger, with a light tone, muttered, "Ol." It enraged Colin and called him son of a bitch. He then raised his sword high for another slash. This time Sir Jaeger moved his sword. The voice told Vlad to watch closely. This moment was meant for him to see. Jaeger deflected the opponent's blade. Sir Colin staggered, caught off guard. Jaeger stared him down. That glare alone sent a shiver through Colin's spine, followed by his startled scream. The voice pointed out the subtle opening Jaeger had created. It was a natural gap formed when you block an incoming strike. That was what they called a counter-attack technique. Vlad realized it now. A counter isn't just hitting back, it's striking in the exact instant when the opponent is vulnerable after being blocked. Sir Colin's large sword was buried in the ground, and Jaeger stood over him like a wall. Sir Colin saw it clearly now. Jaeger wasn't just strong, he was in a league of his own. A level so high it felt untouchable, like no one could ever reach it. He lowered his weapon and admitted defeat. The priest announced Sir Jaeger as the victor. Alicia let out a quiet breath of relief. On the other hand, Endra and his followers couldn't hide the bitterness in their expressions. Sir Jaeger stood up and turned away from the duel grounds. Before leaving, he glanced at Vlad. He asked if he watched carefully. Vlad nodded and thanked him. Now, it was time for the final match. Sir Pablo stepped forward and introduced himself as Pablo of Arnstein. His opponent, a man with purple hair and a mustache, grinned and asked why Pablo was acting formal. They already knew each other. Pablo ignored the banter and repeated his name, forcing the man to respond properly. The other knight finally introduced himself, Joubert of Shazad. The voice inside Vlad commented that Alicia chose her people well. Pablo was strong, equal to Sir Colin, but Joubert was on a whole different tier. Alicia sat quietly on the throne. Joseph watched from her side. Then Alicia noticed something odd. Joubert bowed. Joseph's eyes narrowed in confusion. Why was he bidding farewell? Joubert stunned the arena. He withdrew from the duel. Alicia couldn't say a word. Shock rippled through the spectators. Joseph was furious. Andre smiled smugly and declared that the duel was over. Joseph immediately sensed the trick. Andre had planned this. He had 4 aces from the start. Andre turned to the priest, requesting they acknowledge him as the sole high null before the gods. But Joseph wasn't done. He stood up, his voice firm. Andre teased him, saying that Alicia's knight withdrew from the duel. He added that he understood Joseph's feelings, but that should be the end of it. Joseph declared that the duel couldn't end until he was convinced himself. The Byzede has no intention whatsoever of simply accepting whatever outcome these people have orchestrated, he added.
Thank you all for watching. Please watch this next Giga Chad video, and I'll see you guys next time. Also, support the channel by joining the Summon Club membership. You can also support by just liking the video and being awesome.